much. My name is Bryan Palmer. I'll be chairing this debate. I've been asked by the League for the Fourth International, the United States section known as the Internationalist Group, and by the International Communist League, the United States section known as the Spartacist League, to chair this historic dialogue and exchange. Both groups trace their origins in whole or in part to the revolutionary tendency led by James Robertson and others, a faction formed within and then expelled from the Socialist Workers' Party in the early 1960s. The Spartacist tradition of revolutionary Trotskyism was premised on the need to rebuild the Fourth International, the revolutionary counter to the degeneration of the Communist International under Stalinist leadership over the course of the late 1920s and 1930s. In 1932, with capitalism mired in the depths of the Great Depression, Trotsky wrote, "The whole present stature of capitalism represents a complete, not merely right, but overright prerequisite for the proletarian revolution. What lags behind is the consciousness of the proletariat, its organization, its leadership. Because of the general instability of the social equilibrium, the conjunctural fluctuations lead to enormous shifts of political power to revolutionary and counter-revolutionary disturbances." This stands, I would suggest, as an apt description of our own times, with perhaps the major qualification that counter-revolutionary disturbances certainly outdistance those of a revolutionary character. The Fourth International was forged by Trotsky and others 6 years later, and we have lived in the shadow of its recognition that, quote, "the historical crisis of humanity is reduced to the crisis of revolutionary leadership." For 85 years, the capitalist system has continued to grow overripe for revolution, but it has not been successfully challenged by a subjective contingent of revolutionaries able to overthrow the profit system. Both the League for the Fourth International and the International Communist League appreciate that our current moment is one in which war, imperialism, racist terror, and the desperate need for class struggle politics demand much of those who adhere to the view that revolutionary Trotskyism remains the decisive foundation in building the leadership, programmatic clarity, and organizational initiative that can advance the prospects of working class revolution. The ICL has recently, following its 8th International Conference, begun the process of reconsidering its orientation, and correspondence with the LFI has led to this current debate, the purpose of which is to further political discussion with the goal of regrouping the forces of international revolution. To this end, the topics of discussion today are two: the fight for the Fourth International today, and the meaning and relevance of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. Speaking on the first and longest part of this debate will be Abram Negrete for the LFI and Perrault for the ICL. Negrete is a member of the editorial board of the Internationalist and a former editor of the Spartacist. Perrault is the secretary of the International Secretariat of the ICL. And addressing the second component of the debate will be Anna Milley, a member of the International Executive Committee of the ICL, and Jan Norden, formerly a longtime editor of Workers' Vanguard, and now affiliated with the IG of the LFI. A coin toss will determine who goes first in this, and we'll do that now, and then I will lay out some procedural elements of the debate. So, heads. You win. Your choice. I'll go first. Okay. The debate is going to proceed as follows. Perrault will speak for the ICL on the question of the fight for the Fourth International today for 45 minutes, followed by Negrete, who will speak for the LFI for 45 minutes. If the speakers do not speak for the entire 45 minutes, the remainder of their time that they did not use can be apportioned to their rebuttals or summaries. The rebuttal for the first speaker will be 5 minutes, the rebuttal for the second 5 minutes. and then we will have a discussion opened up on the floor, which will be a discussion of 3 minutes each for speakers who have registered from organizations. Each of those organizations will be allowed 1 speaker. So the organizations must choose which speaker they are going to send to the middle microphone. The microphone on your right will be for the League for the Fourth International. The microphone on the left will be for the International Communist League. Perhaps I'll answer your question. For those who have signed up to speak who are not affiliated with an organization, I will be calling on them later, but there may be limited numbers of speakers depending on the time we have. We've allotted 83 minutes for the discussion. And there will be a break, sadly, of only 15 minutes at roughly 4:50, and then we will proceed to the second half of the debate. I'll do the coin flip before those speakers come to the fore. The presentation on the second topic of the Fourth International will be 20 minutes for each side. There'll be a discussion of 35 minutes and a summary of 7 minutes for each side. We have a very tight agenda. I would ask that everyone keep very much to the 3 minutes. You will be timed. You'll be warned at 2, and at 3 you'll be cut off. People should please mute their cell phones. We are allowing photography and video live streaming by the ICL and the LFI. The live stream camera is set up in the middle back mezzanine area, so if you do not want to appear on the live stream view, you should not sit in the front 6 rows of the middle area. If you want to be anonymous, find yourself a section to the side and to the back, please. At the end, we need to get out quickly, no later than 7 p.m. The ICL invites everyone to join them afterwards at McGee's Pub, 240 West 55th Street, between 8th Avenue and Broadway. I'll probably announce that at the end as well. I think that covers just about everything. So with that, I would ask Negrete to take the, or pardon me, Perrault. My first mistake.
The world is entering a period of acute crisis. The working class confronts war and ruin on a scale unprecedented in decades. Despite bursts of resistance from the workers' movement, it remains far behind in terms of political consciousness, weighed down by leaders who have spent decades preaching class peace. At this turning point of world history, the crisis of proletarian leadership is posed as sharply as ever. Which way forward? This is the theme of today's debate. Trotsky once wrote that the essence of sectarianism consists in measuring historical processes on the scale of one's own group. We will get this from the LFI today. They will try to show that the ICL has done nothing but mistakes, while the LFI has been correct all along. However, their account is totally divorced from the tasks posed in the broader world. They cannot put our disputes in the context of what needed to be done in the 1990s and what needs to be done today. For them, it's all about a word here or there, or tertiary questions, which in no way guide the working class forward. If you think Marxist politics means clinging to orthodox-sounding formulations, you may find their case convincing. But if you focus on the actual theme of this debate, the fight for the Fourth International today, you will see that they offer nothing different from what the entire left has been peddling for decades: opportunism and sterile dogmatism. The ICL, for its part, does not claim to have the answer to every question, and we certainly do not pretend to be a pure and uncontradicted organization. What we can provide, and this will be the focus of my presentation, is precisely an answer to the problem of revolutionary leadership, which has been the source of the crisis for the entire Marxist movement in the last 30 years, including our two organizations. In the transitional program, Trotsky wrote, "The Fourth International does not search after and does not invent panaceas. It takes its stand completely on Marxism as the only revolutionary doctrine that enables one to understand reality, unearth the cause behind defeats, and consciously prepare for victory. It is by these 3 points which I prepare to measure the LFI and ICL, our ability to understand reality, to unearth the cause behind defeats, and to consciously prepare for victory. Only from this standpoint can we go beyond the narrow disputes which have paralyzed our organizations and the entire left, and advance the fight for the Fourth International." Let's start with reality. Marxism is revolutionary because it roots itself not in abstract ideals, but in the material reality of class society. The basic point is simple. Without a correct materialist understanding of the world, it's impossible to guide the proletariat towards its liberation. To understand the current world, it's necessary to go back to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. This momentous event totally changed the balance of class forces internationally to the detriment of the working class. It is the failure of Marxists, including the ICL and LFI, to understand this new period, which lies at the heart of our disputes and at the heart of the entire left's disorientation. The problem of the post-Soviet period, from the Marxist point of view, is the following. It was a period of defeat for workers, while at the same time being a period of relative global stability and prosperity. The question is how to explain this without renouncing Marxism. It is in fact simple. With the destruction of the USSR, the US emerged as the only superpower, and it was strong enough to force every other country, including its imperialist rivals, to comply with its system. The result was to suppress the national conflicts of capitalism in a limited and temporary way. This explains why the post-Soviet period was relatively stable, why international trade developed to unprecedented levels, and why productive forces grew in aggregate. In many ways, the imperialist world system is not so different from organized crime. The bloodiest conflicts emerge when different gangs are fighting for the top spot. When one gang is much stronger, the criminals come out stronger, certainly bad news. But in the short term, violence can go down and business goes up. They can form a cartel. But in organized crime, just as in capitalism, the balance of power is ever changing. The Pax Americana was not only very profitable for the imperialists, but also created conditions for strong economic growth in China and other non-imperialist countries. This process has undermined the hegemony of the United States, and today, the world situation is defined by the accelerating breakdown of the post-Soviet world order. The US must now increase the military and economic pressure on its rivals, but also on the countries it today considers allies. This dynamic is at the source of the growing instability of the world. The post-Soviet period was brutal, but it was nothing next to the economic chaos, social decay, and wars that will come from its breakdown. These basic Marxist points on the world situation are essential to understand political developments nationally and internationally. Taken individually, the points I just made are not groundbreaking. I'm sure you've heard most of them before from various commentators and others on the left. What is unique in the ICL's understanding of the world is that we can explain the evolution of the world situation through the laws of class struggle. We can explain in Marxist terms why the post-Soviet period was reactionary despite its stability, And we can explain why, how it is breaking down today. This is the starting point orienting our work. In other words, we use Marxism to understand reality, and it is from this reality that we can put forward a revolutionary course for the working class. In contrast to this, nothing is Marxist in the way the LFI approaches the world. Their view comes directly from documents written when its founding members were still in the ICL. The method of these documents, carried over to the LFI, is defined by doctrinarism and empirical impressionism. The documents explain the period as follows. The Soviet Union was a counterweight to imperialism, so its destruction will cause more reaction. From this, it was predicted that in the world there would be more inter-imperialist rivalries, that the US-led alliance would collapse, that free trade would end, and that all this was going to lead to immiseration, war, and revolutionary upheavals. The problem is that nothing of the sort happened in the last 30 years. Despite this, the LFI's website welcome page, you can check on your phone, still dutifully asserts that what emerged after 1990 was not a new world order dominated by a single superpower, but a mounting disorder of imperialist rivalries and nationalist bloodletting. To this day, the LFI denies that the world situation since the 90s is defined by US hegemony. This is a problem, especially for a party centered in the United States. So why cling on to such an obviously wrong worldview? It's a question of method and purpose. For the LFI, just as for the ICL before, the task of Marxists is to uphold orthodox formulas. But if you understand Marxism as a guide to class struggle, then you cannot force reality into theory. You must seek to understand reality through Marxist theory. So in part, the LFI upholds its wrong view of the world out of doctrinarism. For them, fighting revisionism means upholding words. But they also have the problem that this false view has guided their entire practice since their founding and is in every single one of their founding documents. To honestly confront these errors is to confront the very basis of their existence, a difficult but necessary thing to do. Now, those who pay attention to detail will have noticed that on some of the LFI's recent articles, they tacitly admit that there is such a thing as a US-dominated world order. But this solves nothing. Their implicit change is simply a response to the reality in front of their nose, not a Marxist understanding of the laws of class struggle. This brings me to the LFI's empirical impressionism, a method which consists in drawing sweeping conclusions from short-term trends. The LFI looks at the news, sees the war in Ukraine, the increasing tensions with China, and declares World War III will occur as a direct outgrowth of current events. If you take the international situation, take a ruler and draw a straight line, this makes sense. But once again, this is not Marxism. Reality is more complicated. To be a Marxist is not simply to predict catastrophe, although catastrophe certainly is on the way. The task is to guide the proletariat based on understanding the laws of class struggle. The current situation is defined by the relative weakening of US hegemony and the entire imperialist bloc, not by the growth of two rival imperialist blocs vying to redivide the world. This is not just a detail, but has important implications on the tempo and nature of conflicts, as well as on the tasks for the working class. For example, if, like the LFI, you think that the current war in Ukraine will be escalated by the imperialists until they manage to break up Russia and destroy China, then it makes some kind of sense that the working class should support Russia. But if you understand that it is a regional war over who controls Ukraine that broke out because the imperialists overextended their hand in Eastern Europe, then it becomes clear that the working class should oppose both sides, that Russia asserting its domination in Ukraine at the expense of the imperialists is not a positive development. Ultimately, whether it is by denying reality or through empiricism, the LFI is navigating without a map, unable to understand the past or predict the future. For them, the world is black and white. There are the good guys and the bad guys, and history moves in neat little boxes along a straight line. This works if you think that the job of Marxism is simply to raise immediate demands while proclaiming that socialist revolution is the solution. In that case, contradictions are irrelevant, and those who so much as acknowledge their existence are rotten revisionists. But for those seeking to lead the working class, this will not do. To you, comrades, I strongly encourage the careful study of our conference document, The Breakdown of US Hegemony and the Struggle for Workers' Power. It does not have all the answers, but I do believe it represents a major step in providing a Marxist program for today's world. Let's move on to the second point. How our tendencies explain the defeats since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Of course, one can always say that the working class was defeated because of its pro-capitalist leadership. This is true, but perfectly useless in drawing any kinds of lessons. The starting point must be the concrete situation following the end of the Cold War. The wave of counter-revolutions came with a strong ideological offensive in the form of liberal triumphalism. The strength of this offensive was rooted in the material strength of US imperialism. Everywhere, it was proclaimed that the whole world needed to accept that there was no alternative to the American model. Democracy, the rule of law, civil liberties, free movement, free trade, these were all rallying cries used by US imperialism to justify and extend its domination. This ideology deeply permeated the workers' movement, pushed by the likes of Tony Blair in Britain, John Sweeney in the US, and Gerhard Schröder in Germany. The strength of liberalism explains the weakness of Marxism in the post-Soviet period. It is a poison to the working class because it obscures the class nature of conflicts and makes everything about abstract moral principles. Now, we often hear the argument that liberalism isn't the problem, that the real danger is right-wing reaction, that to fight liberalism is to help the right. You can be sure that whoever makes this argument is himself a liberal. Here's the basic truth. So long as the working class is under the sway of leaders who look at the world through the lens of universal liberal principles instead of class struggle, the working class cannot defeat reaction. Let's take Trump, for example. His strength comes from the discontent at neoliberal America. But the opposition to him has been under the leadership of the very people responsible for neoliberalism. Moreover, it has been organized around the liberal principles of democracy and decency, not class struggle. Far from defeating Trump, the so-called resistance has only strengthened his appeal. The anti-Trump movement has failed because the workers' movement and left have fought him wearing a liberal straitjacket. Defeating Trump requires breaking with liberalism. This is the central lesson. What does the LFI say about defeats in the post-Soviet period? Its founding declaration correctly states that the fight against revisionism has been a constant in the Marxist movement. It points to Lenin's fight against social democracy, Trotsky's fight against Stalinism, Cannon and later the IST's fight against Pavlovism. But what about today? What is the current form of revisionism today? No answer. In fact, liberalism, the dominant ideology in the workers' movement, is not even mentioned in the LFI's founding document. Why not? Because for the LFI and ICL, liberal triumphalism was dead as early as 1992. This has profound consequences. Think about it. For the last 30 years, movement after movement was paralyzed and led to defeat precisely because of its liberal program. From the anti-globalization movement, to Occupy, to BLM, to the union movement as a whole, all have in common the fact that they tried to fight the liberal order with liberalism. And in turn, right-wing reaction has grown because it is the only force opposing liberalism. So for Marxists, the main task, done by no one, was to build a revolutionary opposition to liberalism, to get into these various movements and fight like hell to put them on a different track away from liberalism towards Marxism. Any talk of revolutionary leadership without doing this is meaningless. However, just like the ICL until recently, the LFI dismisses liberalism as a political force. This necessarily means capitulating to it. It means liquidating the role of the party, abandoning the oppressed to liberals, and rejecting the central task of an entire epoch. And here we come once more to the question of purpose. If you understand revolutionary leadership in terms of guiding the class struggle, you must look at what is holding it back. But if, like the LFI, intervening in the class struggle means putting forward a series of abstract Marxist platitudes, then liberalism doesn't matter, and the oppressed can stay on their road to disaster. I'm not finished. This brings me to the third point, the road to victory. How can tiny Marxist organizations provide a road to victory for the international working class? It is certainly not through the strength of our objective forces or the purity of our intentions. We can make such a claim only to the extent that our program provides a course of action which corresponds to the historic interest of the proletariat. Revolutionary leadership must be grounded in the 2 points we've already discussed: a correct understanding of the objective situation and a correct understanding of why the working class keeps losing. But as we have also seen, this analysis can only be Marxist if it is guided by a correct purpose, to provide a revolutionary path counterposed to the reformist leaders. Let me make this concrete with the best example of all, the Russian Revolution. The February Revolution created a situation where the working class had overthrown the Tsar, but where its leaders had given the power to the liberal bourgeoisie. The role of the Bolshevik Party from February to October was not to create the forces behind revolution, but to guide the working class, to show at every step how its interests were being betrayed by the Mensheviks and SRs. In other words, the revolution was victorious because the Bolsheviks succeeded in breaking the working class from its reformist leaders, opening the road to its historic interests. This was not done through abstract preaching or proclaiming the need for a revolutionary party at the end of every article, but by adapting slogan and tactics to every twist and turn of the situation, always guided by a clear revolutionary goal. This is the meaning of revolutionary leadership. Whether there is a revolutionary situation, a strike, or a reactionary offensive, the task of communists is to show through the struggle itself that the working class needs a communist leadership. It is from this fundamental starting point that the ICL approaches all questions. What is the LFI starting point? We have already seen how it has a totally wrong understanding of the world situation and how it denies liberalism is the central obstacle holding back the workers' movement. This clearly makes it impossible to guide the working class. But these failures could be corrected with a clear understanding of communist tasks. Unfortunately, it doesn't have this either. The LFI does not openly support the liberal bourgeoisie as the Mensheviks after February. But neither is it working to break the working class from their misleaders as the Bolsheviks did. The role it plays is more akin to the conciliators within the Bolshevik Party during the revolution, such as Zinoviev and Kamenev. They uphold a formally revolutionary program and criticize reformists, but the axis of their work is not to break the working class from these reformists. This is centrism, and it permeates everything the LFI does. To make the difference between our two approaches concrete, I will go through some of the major political questions in the current period. In every case, you will see the same pattern. The ICL seeks to advance working class struggle and break the influence of its reformist leaders. The LFI either seeks to advance the struggle while accepting the leadership of the reformists, or denounces the reformists while standing aside from struggle. Whether it is through opportunism or sectarianism, the LFI's program always leaves the reformists in charge of the struggle. Since we're in the US, let's start with the black question in the United States. Going all the way back to the Civil War era, reliance on the liberal wing of the American bourgeoisie has held back the struggle for black liberation. Ending black oppression requires radical revolutionary measures which the capitalist class will never accept. The movement for black liberation cannot be victorious as long as it is tied in any way to this class. From this, it's obvious that the task of revolutionaries is to break the chains tying the black movement to the liberal bourgeoisie. Now, let's see how this played out in the 2020 BLM movement provoked by the murder of George Floyd. The movement itself was dominated by liberal politics and was supported by some of the most reviled Democrats and Republicans. Most of the labor movement and left openly defended the coalition between black activists and capitalist politicians using the movement to build Joe Biden's election campaign. Here we have our Mensheviks. What about the LFI? It correctly recognized that the reformists crossed the class line, seeking a political alliance with bourgeois liberal forces. But if you look at their intervention, it's obvious that its purpose was not to break this political alliance between labor and the liberals. This is centrism, seeing the problem, but doing nothing to solve it. Let me explain. One of the LFI's main demands is for labor actions against police brutality. The working class does need to be brought in the fight, but the whole question is under which program? A liberal one, leading to the Democratic Party, or a Marxist one, leading to black liberation? The LFI is quite explicit that its model for working class action in defense of black people is the liberal rally organized by the ILWU on Juneteenth of 2020. So on one hand, they say, break with the Democrats, but on the other, they promote politics and leaders which brings workers straight into the Democratic Party. Instead of showing how a real working class fight to defend black people requires a completely different leadership, it encourages the actions of the current leadership. It's very simple. The leaders of the ILWU are an obstacle to black liberation, but the LFI nonetheless hails their liberal rallies as some kind of step in the right direction. The LFI is not missing a word here or there. It is building a labor wing of the BLM Popular Front. Its perspective guarantees disaster for black people. Now, I'm sure most of you know that the ICL imploded in 2020 and was utterly paralyzed during this historic movement. But unlike the LFI, the ICL drew lessons from this betrayal. Out of the struggle which emerged in our ranks, we have reasserted the fundamental task of Marxists towards the movement against police brutality, to advance the struggle while showing in practice that victory requires a total different track, that is, a revolutionary break with liberal politics. Today, the movement against police brutality is utterly demoralized. The most atrocious crimes provoke only pitiful demonstrations. How to move forward? We propose to rebuild the movement by organizing around the demand to open all police archives. It is a demand which is popular. It intersects the felt sentiments of the black population and beyond. But it is also a demand whose pursuit will directly clash with the liberals. It gives a path out of demoralization, while at the same time helping to break the movement from liberalism. The LFI has denounced our campaign as reformist. Our crime? We say that we want to pressure liberal politicians to support our demand. Of course we do. We want to break their influence. Have you ever tried breaking something without putting pressure on it? Try it. But once again, you have the LFI missing the forest for the trees. It focuses on a word here or there and chooses to ignore the whole purpose of our call, to advance the fight against police brutality and break the influence of the liberals. The LFI, for its part, prefers marching in the galleries, proclaiming, only socialist revolution will bring justice. Very radical, but it does nothing to advance the movement and nothing to break it from its current leaders. To sum up, for the ICL, the central task is to break the struggle for black liberation from liberalism and win it to communism. For the LFI, on one hand, it's to push the pro-capitalist labor bureaucracy like the ILWU to lead the movement, and on the other, to proclaim radical-sounding abstractions. Our approach is revolutionary. That of the LFI is class collaborationist and sectarian. Without a doubt, the question of China is one of the most important questions of our epoch. We both agree that China is a deformed worker state. We both formally stand for its unconditional defense in the face of counter-revolution and imperialist aggression. And we both stand for political revolution. But as on everything else, our approach is radically different. The ICL proceeds from the basic Trotskyist understanding that the Stalinist bureaucracy undermines the social gains of the 1949 revolution on which it stands. For this reason, we never support policies of the Communist Party of China, all rooted in the program of socialism in one country. Instead, on every question, we put forward a revolutionary internationalist program which defends the worker state in opposition to the bureaucracy. We are for defeating COVID in China, but we oppose the bureaucracy's brutal response, which was premised on maintaining its privileges and that of the capitalist class. We are for defending China against imperialism, but we oppose the CPC's nationalist strategy, which alienates the international proletariat while conciliating imperialism. In every case, we want to show the Chinese working class that its interests are being held back and betrayed by the Stalinist bureaucracy. Now, as I said, the LFI claims to be for political revolution, but this is betrayed by its support to Stalinist policies, sometimes critically, mostly uncritically. For the LFI, the main task is to counter imperialist propaganda spouted in the West against China. However, it does this by covering up the crimes of the CPC and burying the Trotskyist program. In the case of COVID, the LFI hails the CPC's response and even promises an article showing that there were no failures or cover-ups at all by the bureaucracy. This is crass political support to Stalinism. Far from defending China, it encourages the very policies which undermine it. The CPC's response to the pandemic caused massive discontent in the working class and among the petty bourgeoisie. If this anger is not directed towards political revolution, it will be used by the imperialists to foster counter-revolution. A working class answer to COVID would have been redistribution of housing and resources, early mass vaccination, and democratic control by the working class, not the totalitarian dynamic zero COVID, nor the 180-degree turn ignoring the virus. The LFI will no doubt agree that by denouncing the policies of the Chinese bureaucracy and being very harsh, we betray the defense of China. This argument is just a pathetic echo of the Stalinist slanders against Trotsky. His response to this argument, and our response to the LFI today, is that the worker state can only be defended by fighting to overthrow Stalinism. That means exposing its crimes. Let's take the gulags in the USSR, for example. The imperialists used the crimes of Stalin to attack the Soviet Union. But the Trotskyist response was not to deny or minimize these crimes, but to undercut the counter-revolution by providing a proletarian opposition to Stalinism based on defending the USSR. I challenge the LFI today to provide a single example where Trotsky hailed the policies of Stalin in the name of defending the Soviet Union. Never. Even when the defense of the Soviet Union was sharply posed in the lead-up to World War II, his defensism was always paired with a devastating critique of the Stalinist strategy. Again, we see the same pattern. For the ICL, advancing the interest of the Chinese working class requires a total break with the main political force holding it back, the Stalinist bureaucracy. For its part, the LFI critically supports Stalinism. On one side, we have Trotskyism. On the other, social democratic cheerleaders akin to the 1930s Friends of the USSR. Now, let's move to another flashpoint, the Ukraine war. Here, the LFI and ICL have fundamentally different understandings of the conflict. For the ICL, this is a proxy war between NATO and Russia over who will control Ukraine. Our central slogan is for Russian and Ukrainians to turn the guns around. For the LFI, the war is about the national survival of Russia. Accordingly, they support Russia. I'll not spend too much time refuting this absurd position eviscerated in the yet unanswered polemic, IG goes all in for Russia. In any case, time is doing its work. With every passing day, the Ukrainian army gets weaker and the predatory ambitions of Russia larger. Kremlin officials are more and more open about their designs on large parts of Ukraine well beyond clear pro-Russian areas. Meanwhile, the imperialists are reducing support to their proxy and will leave it out to dry sooner or later. This is the difference between a proxy war and imperialist war. Let's see if in a year or two, the LFI still thinks that the war is about the dismemberment of Russia. Let's see. While the position on the war itself is of great importance, the decisive test for tendencies is our struggle at home. In imperialist countries, the task is to break the working class from its leaders who actively support their government's foreign policy. The main obstacle impeding this break are the various pacifists and reformists who preach opposition to NATO and even the boycott of arms shipments, but stay loyal to the liberal wing of the imperialist bourgeoisie. Exposing these pacifist conciliators and fighting to split workers from the pro-imperialist labor bureaucracy has been at the heart of the ICL's entire intervention on Ukraine. We have pushed this intervention most forcefully in Germany by calling to throw out the NATO supporters out of the social democracy and trade unions. Once again, our purpose with this call is on one hand to advance the movement against the war, totally paralyzed by unity with the pro-NATO wing, and on the other, to expose the pacifists who choose unity with war hawks over their supposed principles. The LFI denounces this approach. For them, the task is twofold. On one hand, it abstractly proclaims the need for a revolutionary party. On the other, it supports the symbolic boycotts of arms shipments organized by left-wing trade unions in Italy and Greece. Of course, it's necessary to participate and support such actions. But the LFI supports these actions uncritically, papering over the fact that they organized under the pacifist program of Greek Stalinists and Italian syndicalists. It's precisely this program and leadership which stands as the main obstacle to organizing a real, generalized blockage of arms shipments. To sweep this fact under the rug is to prop up the very leaders who need to be removed. The LFI criticizes reformists in general, including those that organize these actions. But when it comes to their concrete actions, it seems the revolutionary program is no longer necessary, and pacifism does just fine. This is getting repetitive, but here we have it again. For the ICL, advancing the struggle against imperialism goes together with splitting the base of the labor movement from the tops. Meanwhile, the LFI builds the illusion in the left wing of the trade union bureaucracy, while at the same time crying revolution into the wind. The most significant event in 2023 was the outbreak of the Gaza war. If you compare the initial statements by the ICL and LFI with a checklist, they seem identical. Revolutionary solution, check. Unity of Jewish workers and Palestinians, check. Criticism of Hamas, check. So what's the difference? Once more, it's not about the words, but the purpose. The ICL stands clearly for the liberation of Palestinians. The entire axis of our intervention is to provide a program to defend Gaza, defeat the Zionist state, and defeat imperialism. However, we recognize that the main obstacle holding back this struggle is the leadership of the clerical nationalist Hamas. Their actions on October 7, directed at civilians, were not only criminal, but totally counterproductive to Palestinian liberation. To be victorious, the Palestinian needs a different strategy, a communist one. But for this to happen, it's necessary to be open about the truth. There will be only death and defeat with Hamas. I dare anyone today to argue that this statement is false. For the LFI, to state this truth is to capitulate to imperialism and Zionism. This only makes sense if your intervention is not aimed at providing actual leadership to the Palestinian struggle, but to simply be in liberal solidarity. For the LFI and most reformist groups, it's more important to be perceived as supportive of the Palestinian movement than to provide a road which will lead to liberation instead of disaster. This is not only cynical, but criminal. In the imperialist countries, the movement in defense of Palestine refuses on one hand to confront Palestinian nationalism, but at the same time, it only openly supports capitalist politicians like Rashida Tlaib and AOC, representatives of the very party enabling genocide in Gaza. The SLUS has recently written an article seeking to polarize the DSA on this question. The article seeks to encourage left-wing pro-Palestinian elements in the DSA to fight for a split with the Democratic Party. We show how the defense of Palestine is directly undermined by unity with Democrats. The LFI has not yet commented on the article, but you don't need to be a genius to know what they'll say. They'll no doubt denounce us as opportunists for seeking to intervene in the DSA at all. It may sound very radical to simply yell at DSA members that they are part of the Democratic Party, but it does nothing to exploit the very real contradictions which exist among its members, many of whom consider themselves communists. Far from being hard, the LFI intervention on Palestine does absolutely nothing to break the movement from the clutches either of Hamas or of the Democrats. The LFI sees that these two forces are obstacle to Palestinian liberation. They know that to be successful, the movement needs to be broken from their leadership. But they refuse to direct their entire energy to fight for this break. By this point, I hope I don't need to summarize the two different approaches, and that you can start seeing it for yourselves. It always comes down to the two interrelated questions: how to move the struggle forward, how to forge a communist leadership. In conclusion, I would like to recall the following words from Trotsky. How the new international will take form, through what stages it will pass, what final shape it will assume, this no one can foretell. And indeed, there is no need to do so. Historical events will show. But it is necessary to begin by proclaiming a program that meets the task of our epoch. On the basis of this program, it is necessary to mobilize the co-thinkers, the pioneers of the new international. No other road is possible. This is precisely what I've sought to put forward today, a program for reforging the Fourth International. My presentation was rooted in a Marxist understanding of the world. It identified the main reasons for the defeats suffered by the working class in the post-Soviet period. And most importantly, it provided a road to victory which advanced the interest of the working class right now, while also driving a wedge against liberalism, Stalinism, and nationalism. It is around this basic approach that we seek to win co-thinkers and play a role in regrouping revolutionary forces internationally. My presentation today showed that there are indeed fundamental differences between the LFI and ICL. At the same time, whether they like it or not, the LFI is not so different from the ICL 3 years ago. In this sense, we think that despite all the bad blood and bitterness between us, it is entirely possible to move closer to each other through serious political discussion. We will continue to fight for this, and we will continue to seek joint actions with the LFI whenever possible. The task at hand is urgent. Enough sectarian squabbling. Join us in the fight to reforge the Fourth International. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? I wanted to thank Bryan for chairing today's debate, and also all of the people from both organizations who worked really hard on the technical and other arrangements. And I also wanted to thank Comrade Perrault for helping to make my job up here somewhat easier. Actually, a lot easier. So, the title of today's debate, as you're aware, is The Fight for the Fourth International Today. In other words, the World Party of Socialist Revolution, which was founded by Leon Trotsky and his co-thinkers in 1938, and was destroyed in 1951 to 53 by the revisionist current within the Fourth International that came to be known as Pabloism after the then International Secretary of the Fourth International, Michel Pablo. The central thesis of the founding program of the Fourth International, Death Agony of Capitalism and the Tasks of the Fourth International, known as the Transitional Program, is that the crisis of humanity is reduced to the crisis of revolutionary leadership. Interestingly, that thesis, and defending it or attacking it or dismissing it, saying it was obsolete, was one of the early political disputes between us and the old ICL, well, let's call it the middle old ICL or something like that, before the current born-again ICL. But after our expulsion in 1996, early on, we had to defend against a revisionist attack by the ICL. That concept at the heart of the transitional program, and you can read about it in Internationalist number 5, in an article called In Defense of the Transitional Program. So I think that if we look at the world today, we can certainly see that this thesis is as urgent as ever, and I would argue even more urgent. We have the war on Gaza, the genocidal war against the Palestinian people. And this is a U.S. war, a U.S.-Israel genocidal war in Gaza, and it is proceeding every day. The fact that it is a U.S. war is of enormous importance, and it's something that the LFI emphasizes, the ICL. I'm not sure if they've ever even said that, but in any case, our line is to defend Gaza and to defeat the U.S.-Israel genocidal war and to bring out the power of the international working class. From here to Portland, to Italy, to Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere, LFI comrades are part of the fight to defend the Palestinian people, to defeat the witch hunts against defenders of the Palestinian people, and to stop the flow of arms to this genocidal war. So we have been part of those mobilizations, and out in the hallway you can see a poster about the motions that our comrades in Portland, Oregon have initiated and that were passed for the stopping of arms shipments by construction workers' unions in Portland, Oregon, on the basis of those comrades' struggle in the Painters Union and elsewhere for a break with the Democratic Party and the forging of a class struggle workers' party, a motion that was passed in the Painters Union some years ago and has been the basis for much of their work. On the Ukraine war, as explained in the Internationalist, this went from the original nationalist war between two non-imperialist capitalist states to a full-on US-NATO proxy war against Russia, which is a way station, as the imperialist military and political chiefs say, a way station towards war against China. That war is aimed in large part against China, something that we also rarely, if ever, hear from the ICL. And this is part of a drive by US imperialism heading towards World War III. Only socialist revolution can stop that world war. Now, our position with regard to the Ukraine war, revolutionaries stand for the defeat of the imperialists and for the military defense of those targeted by them, Russia and the Chinese deformed worker state. You will have noticed that Comrade Perrault said that the war in Ukraine is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. The ICL states correctly that Russia is not an imperialist country. It states correctly, obviously, that NATO is a military alliance of imperialist countries headed by the US. Not only that, it's headed by a liberal party, okay, the Democratic Party, all right? Despite this, the ICL refuses to defend the targets of that imperialist war. It takes a neutralist position, saying it's a war between two gangs of thugs. So a lot of liberals say that. In fact, I think I hear that from liberals pretty much every day. Just a gang of thugs on one side and just a gang of thugs on the other side. Okay? So apparently the defeat of Russia by the imperialists would be a matter of indifference. Now we hear about this unipolar world. Well, in fact, after the counter-revolutionary destruction of the Soviet Union, right, there was considerable disunity amongst the imperialists, perhaps not as much as foreseen in the prognosis of a memorandum from 1994 or a document from 1992, but there was something called the Yugoslavia War. You may have heard of it. There was the Iraq War, where there was not unity amongst the imperialists, okay, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But where you do get something approximating that picture is right now with the US-NATO imperialist war against Russia, in which the ICL refuses to defend the targets of the imperialist onslaught and uses liberal verbiage to promote that position. All right, let's move on. There's a lot to say and not much time. So we give no political support, obviously, to the bourgeois government of Putin, but we call for bringing out the power of the working class to stop the arms shipments to the imperialist proxies, the Ukraine government. Now, on the basis of what program, based on historical experience, can the Fourth International be reforged? And Comrade Perrault said, and I think correctly, that the question of which program is of great importance. So, let me just say, and I said this at an SL forum, when I was recruited to the SL youth group in 1972-73, and at that time the Socialist Workers' Party claimed to be Trotskyist, and they called us, guess what? 3 guesses. Starts with an S. Sectarians. And we were characterized by sectarianism. But they, tooth and nail, denied that they were abandoning Trotskyism. And they had some very intelligent people, writers and so forth. Joseph Hansen was very competent, and a bunch of others, who would contest every single time that we said, you're abandoning the Trotskyist program. Until in the early 80s, after a study of the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the peasantry, and after polemics on this by Doug Jeunesse, and after polemics on this by other leaders of the Socialist Workers' Party, they came out in 1982 with a speech by Jack Barnes called Their Trotsky and Ours. And they said, you know what? We're not Trotskyists. Trotskyism is ultra-left sectarianism, and that permanent revolution thing, no good. And guess what? We've discovered the importance of supporting the Freedom Charter in South Africa. Freedom Charter and the ANC, okay? That was an important thing. Now with the Spartacist tendency, with the Spartacist League and the ICL, we were expelled in 1996 on frame-up charges, right? They were frame-up charges, right? As Comrade Perrault says, right. They were, thank you. Listen to that. In other words, what's been said about us for 28 years was a lie. You understand that? But let's move on from that. Okay. But we said, year after year, we documented the abandonment of one key position after another by the ICL. But they denied that they were abandoning the historic program of Spartacism. But now we have a new revelation. Does everybody have their Spartacist 68? I very much agree with Comrade Perrault that this should be studied carefully, actually very carefully, okay? And here what it says is, you know what? The Spartacist tendency was deformed from birth. We were wrong on just about everything, they say, right? As for your paper, right, the paper the paper that was of one section or another, we renounce that paper back to the beginning, they say. Okay? They have junked, and they're in the process of junking in a kaleidoscopic, dizzying way, one part of that program after another. It's far from over. I said at one of the ICL's forums in May, the members of the Spartacist League and of the ICL do not know what their politics will be next week, or next month, or next year, because they're changing so rapidly. But in any event, that debate is over. The historic program of Spartacism is ours. They have renounced it. They say that it was a betrayal. They say it was a betrayal on one thing after another. They throw it into the garbage. But we maintain that that historic program of Spartacism is crucial and vital to reforging the Fourth International. So that's what the debate is about. Is the historic program of Spartacism, which was not the invention of some person in a fever dream, it was the distillation of decades of bloody struggles of the oppressed and the lessons of the past history of the Fourth International and the communist movement, is the historic program of Spartacism fundamental to reforging the Fourth International? We say yes, and they say no. They say no. Well, at least that's out of the way. So, we're going to get to, so what was the foundation of the Spartacist tendency? It came out of the Socialist Workers' Party in something called the Revolutionary Tendency. As most of the people here know, it was a group of young revolutionaries. Some of them had been Shachtmanites, but the experience of the Hungarian Revolution taught them a thing or two. For example, on the Russian question. With me? And they came over to the Socialist Workers' Party. And so when the challenge of the Cuban Revolution arose, they were pretty well armed to have a revolutionary Marxist position, okay, of militant defense of Cuba, but understanding that it was in the process of consolidating as a deformed worker state, and that a political revolution by the proletariat was necessary to open the road to socialism, to establish workers' democracy based on workers' Soviets, and a policy of revolutionary internationalism to expand the revolution. They rejected the suicidal strategy of guerrilla warfare. And the Russian question became key for the Spartacist tendency throughout its history. The Russian question in the Soviet Union, the Russian question in Vietnam, the Russian question in Cuba, the Russian question in Poland, which the ICL is now renouncing, okay, what the Spartacist tendency had to say about Poland at the crucial moment of 1981, openly, okay? 2, the black question in the United States. The black question in the United States. Key to proletarian revolution, the specific nature of U.S. society, a society in which black oppression lies at the root of the origins of this society and at the heart of almost every political question in this society, every social question. Okay? And the program of revolutionary integrationism in opposition to false roads like black nationalism, or following the liberal leadership, right, of the liberal pro-democratic party, leaders of the official civil rights movement. And the RT fought inside the Socialist Workers' Party to get the activists from the SWP down there into the movement, to get them on the buses, get them into the streets with the program that we now synthesize as black liberation through socialist revolution. Okay? With me? This was enormously important for arming the Spartacist tendency in the future. not only on the black question and in the extremely important and historic mobilizations to stop the Ku Klux Klan, for example, in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, right? But also on other questions of special oppression, like the woman question, the fight for women's liberation through socialist revolution, right? And this led to one of the most important Marxist journals, in my opinion, of the post-war period, Women in Revolution. What's your position on that journal? I'd like to hear. Do you renounce that as well? Somebody answer that question today, please. Because we consider Women in Revolution, in a majority of basically pretty close to the end of it. Can't remember when it stopped publication. But we consider it ours in the sense of part of our political legacy. What's your line on that? But it also was key to other questions of understanding the Leninist Party as the tribune of the people, the tribune of the oppressed. This was key, for example, to the historic fusion with the former Lavender and Red Union, which changed its name to Red Flag Union, a gay revolutionary Marxist group, right? And then the struggle against Pabloism was the third, if you like, whale. Just thought of that. The third whale of the RT. Okay, the struggle against Pabloism, the struggle against the liquidation of the independent revolutionary Marxist Party as the essential instrument for leading the proletariat and the oppressed to victory, and the tailism of the existing leaderships of the liquidationist leaders of the Fourth International. Now, can people get their reading for today out, please? Okay. Spartacist, 68, and the LFI chooses sectarianism. So we read here, a program for the Fourth International. And I'm like, wow, hey, I kind of thought there was one already, the transitional program, but this ought to be interesting. I'd like to see what it has to say about the black question in the United States, for example. The citadel of world imperialism, about the struggle in the United States for black liberation, which was one of the pillars of the RT. Guess how much it has to say about that? Nothing. Please explain why. Why does the program for the Fourth International, according to you, not mention the struggle for black liberation in the United States one time, not once? Please explain. Second question, the struggle against Pabloism. Well, if you have to reforge the Fourth International, why is that? And it took us a while to settle on that word, didn't it? Comrades who remember and who want to remember. We had rebirth of the Fourth International, reconstruct the Fourth International. No, that didn't work. It wasn't good. I don't have time to explain why. We came upon this somewhat exotic thing, reforge. But in any case, why? Not a word about it. Not a word. What about the Cuban Revolution and its lessons? Cuba is mentioned in a few lists of countries. The Cuban Revolution is mentioned in a photo caption on page 42. Please open to page 42. You can do it too, you know. It's yours. We've studied it. This is the only place that the Cuban Revolution is mentioned in a photo caption to make fun of the Spartacist tendency. Deformed at birth. Get it? Get it? You know, like a deformed worker state. Isn't that funny? That's the only time. That is the only time the Cuban Revolution is mentioned. The Cuban Revolution is under threat right now. Right now. What's your line? What is your line on the riots in Cuba in July of 2021, in which counter-revolutionary instigators, yes, took advantage of the economic crisis? Do you consider the question of defense of the Cuban Revolution in the here and now, not in doctrinal abstractions of orthodox sectarians, but now? Do you consider it worthy of inclusion in what you call the program for the Fourth International? If so, why is it not here? If not, please explain. So I was having some trouble, quite a bit of trouble actually, preparing for this debate for one reason. In one aspect, it was fun in a lot of ways. How would one explain this to young people who want to figure out what is this all about? And when I was being recruited away from Guevarism, Stalinism, in high school, me and my best friend, we used to get all the leftist papers and try to figure out what they're talking about. Like, what the hell is this? I don't understand this stuff. We had to read 2 tactics at an SL study group. I think the person who gave it might be here, right? And was a group in 2 tactics called Osvobождение. What the hell is that? What is a revolutionary dictatorship, etc.? We read a little red pamphlet. I actually have it here, but I forgot to get it out, called 3 Concepts of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky, which contrasts the revolutionary democratic dictatorship formula of Lenin to the permanent revolution and to the Mensheviks. That was our main reading for one of the SLRCY study groups. But why, we wondered, were people arguing about such things? What did it mean in politics today? So I think a lot of people probably wonder about that today. So I was trying to think of some kind of analogy, and I wasn't doing so well. So first I thought, well, here this Spartacus 68, the new revelation and the new evangel, I guess, it has a bunch of things to say, but they're mainly about the ICL and how it's screwed up in a whole lot of ways, okay? So I was wondering, like, how would one explain this? And a funny thing happened to me on the way to the forum. I mean, the debate. A guy came up to me, kind of a little guy, and he said, "Are you going to the debate?" And I said, "I am." He said, "I don't understand what is happening between your group and their group. Could you please explain?" And I thought I should try to boil it down somehow. So I came up with an analogy of a company that builds bridges, and when asked, "Well, what's your experience building bridges? Like, what's your record? Say for the past 30 years. Oh, all our bridges fell down. But now we're very good at building bridges, we hope." And I thought, no, that's not such a good one. Maybe you should use one with doctors. I thought, no, that's not so good. So I thought, why not make it real? Comrade Perrault is right and Bryan is right. They both said it or implied it, that this is going to be, and it is already, but will be increasingly a turbulent period. There's going to be a lot of struggles. So I thought, why not imagine that this audience consists of workers involved in a hot struggle, a really hot struggle, who are getting fed up with their reformist leaders and looking for something like revolutionary leadership. And they are comparing the 2 organizations. And they say, listen, we want some kind of radical leadership, but we want to know who is who and what is your experience in the sense of not how old you are and how many years you've lived, but what's your record, okay? What is your record? So we would say, well, the LFI has fought seriously, consistently, and systematically. We have written, and we have fought in the class struggle to bring the revolutionary program of Trotskyism into the living class struggle. Okay? So they might say to us, well, we heard, or someone told us you lead some workers out in Portland. Is anybody from Portland here? If so, could you stand up? So, thank you. So you can talk to her and ask, we would say to these workers. She can tell you about the struggle to stop the fascists, Portland labor against the fascists, and the role of class struggle militants. How was that connected to fighting against the union bureaucracy, tying the painters' union and other unions to the boss's Democratic Party? What about the motions that were just passed, and the ironworkers and the painters, okay? That not just saying that they stand for stopping the arms shipments, but calling on the labor movement to stop the arms shipments. How did that happen? What about the struggle to free Mumia Abu Jamal? There's some lessons out there. Weren't you guys, because it's In the painters union, it was mainly guys. It is mainly guys. In a pre-strike situation recently, what did you do about that? How is it connected to the struggle against the Democratic Party mayor? And what about when Portland was occupied pretty much by the feds and by tear gas Ted Wheeler, the Democratic Party mayor, during the mass upheaval against racist police terror after the racist murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others? There's a poster display out there. I invite you to see it. How about in Mexico, right? Like in the Oaxaca struggles, the struggles over Ayotzinapa, and there's a strike right now in Mexico City. How about that huge UNAM strike in 1999 to 2000, bringing the Trotskyist program, the program of the transitional program into the class struggle? Did you, from the LFI, have anything like that? In that huge strike in the largest university in Latin America, when the World Bank, a pillar of the liberal order indeed, ordered the Mexican government to impose tuition. Is anybody here from Mexico? Can you stand up, please? Yeah, it's real funny, because bringing the transitional program into that struggle meant sparking workers' defense guards. Look it up in your transitional program. That's the old program for the Fourth International, not this one. Look it up. They caused to be organized workers' defense guards, which defended the strike on 24 hours a day when the army in July of 1999 threatened to invade the largest university in Latin America. And as a result of that, UNAM is still free. I got my MA there for $0.00, but that was before. Yeah, you know, it's very sectarian action. How about, for example, the university strike? Speaking of university strikes here, or rather, speaking of university strikes, how about the one here in New York? It was a big university strike about 2 years ago. Right? Anybody here was in that strike? Stand up if you were. I'm serious. Let's see the sectarians. What did you fight for? Picket lines mean don't cross. Is that part of the program? It's very abstract. It's an abstract orthodox dogma. Fighting for that against the DSA, your new friends, or hoped for friends. Revolutionaries in the DSA, give me a break. It's a faction of the imperialist government party, the war criminal party. Don't tell me about revolutionaries in the party of genocide. Party of Vietnam War and napalm in Hiroshima. If they had an ounce of revolutionary in them, they would not be in that organization. Opportunism, yes, we call it that. But fighting against the DSA and the Democratic Party in that strike, which led to shut it down on December 8th, where the picket line, right, where the SL was there, the only thing they were doing, even when people were crashing through the picket line, literally, was trying to get people to take their nutty, it's a polite word for it, lockdown leaflet. That was the only thing they did there, okay? But as a result of that strike won. It is connected to the program, all right? What about the witch hunts? The witch hunts right now, the McCarthyite witch hunts against defenders of the Palestinian people. Anybody here been involved in the struggle against that? Yeah, I'm going to ask you to stand up again. What about organizing immigrant workers, one of the most exploited and oppressed sectors of the proletariat in this city? What about Hot and Crusty as the former vice president of the union there here? Charlie, would you stand up? He was fired. He's been fired many times for organizing unions, many times. And he was part of the struggle at Hot and Crusty to put into effect the slogan, full citizenship rights for all immigrants, and to fight against the union bureaucracy, which turns its back on them. Hot and Crusty, Broad Kitchen, B&H, Cabricanecos, Liberato Restaurant. In each of these, the youth organization and the IG have brought the comrades into it to fight for the revolutionary program. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I forgot. So when the comrades were arrested in Mexico in the UNAM strike, there was only one organization that had no one arrested in it. 3 guesses. Oh yes, the ICL. Why? 3 guesses. When the cops arrived on the campus to arrest 1,000 students, the ICL wasn't there. What a surprise. Isn't that a big surprise? So these workers then want to know, what about the mass upsurge against the racist police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor? Well, we collapsed, says the ICL. You mean you weren't there at all? Well, did you publish something? What's that? 15 minutes you want. Did you publish something? No. Did you post something? No. Did you put out a leaflet? No. Why? Well, we'll get to that in a second. And so one could go on. What about 9/11? Well, we'll talk about that later, I guess. We'll talk about that later. So then they say, well, what were you doing for the past 30 years? Well, it's all in Spartacist. We were betraying. Wait a minute, you betrayed for 30 years? Yes, according to you. Seriously? Well, what were you doing in your organization? Well, we were having a whole lot of turmoil and a lot of fights, right? Lots and lots of fights for 30 years, okay? Well, what did those fights consist of? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not very interesting. I could go through them all, said Comrade Perrault in a report which is published here, but they're not very interesting. They're all basically meaningless. Okay, so you're talking about you devoured yourselves for 30 years. Okay, 30 years. But now, yes, now we're back. Now we're back. Okay? They say. They were very busy. But then, they did come out after 2 years with Workers' Vanguard. This is the first issue that came out. Okay? 1177. And in that issue, what did they do? Well, they were very productive. They listed their betrayals. 8 betrayals. 8. On what? According to them, on the black question. According to them, on the trade union question. According to them, on 6 other questions. And then they came out with another issue, okay? Which listed more betrayals, all right? On what questions? Well, on the woman question, for example, and other questions, okay? So if these workers then asked, so you're saying that you betrayed over and over and over again. How about on Haiti when you supported the US imperialist occupation? Why did that happen? Oh, we don't really want to talk about that very much. We were wrong. The IG was right. But why did it happen? Maybe because of a memorandum that people voted for 25 years before that. The memorandum made us do it. And the reason why you betrayed on these other questions? Well, we were really like the IG, you know. Both of us supported the same memorandum in the same tasks and perspectives document. Now, sometimes tasks and perspectives documents and memorandums can have some good aspects of their prognoses and some not so accurate aspects, okay? But the argument that this is the essential question and that if you get your prognoses wrong, everything is garbage and your program is garbage, this is the argument that was used after World War II when Trotsky's prognoses of the post-World War II period were largely not confirmed in reality. It was used by whom? It was used by the Goldman-Morrow faction in the Socialist Workers' Party. And what was their program? Democracy. They said the Trotskyists must be the best fighters for democracy. Oh, in general. In Spanish, the expression is democracy tiene nombre y apellido. It has a first and last name. There's bourgeois democracy, there's proletarian democracy, but the Goldman-Morrow faction said democracy, okay, in general. Cochrane Clark, during the Pablo fight, they also said that the prognoses of the SWP and of Trotsky did not come true in some considerable part, and therefore the program was off. Where was the program, the fundamental programmatic questions determined by this? But back to the workers asking these questions. Okay? So, your organization, they would say, your organization gave rise to another organization. How did that happen? Well, we expelled them back in 1996. Well, why did you do that? You also organized some trials and stuff? Yeah, we did that. We're investigating that. Well, what do you think about it? Well, it was unprincipled. The fight against them was unprincipled. Really? Why? Oh, because both they and us voted for the same memorandum. The memorandum made you do it? Well, why did it happen? I don't know. Maybe you could ask some of the people in this room who did it, because they're here. Well, what about this stuff in Brazil? Is it true that what you did in Brazil was unprincipled? Yeah, it's true. It's true, isn't it? Is it true? Comrade Perrault is saying yes, and he's written it. Well, why did it happen? Why did that happen? Oh, we're not sure yet, but it was unprincipled. Why? Well, because both sides voted for the same document. Oh, did the comrades in Brazil vote for that document? No, they weren't around at that time. They were busy organizing illegal strikes under the, well, they weren't illegal anymore, but against the military, and they were in a centrist organization called Causa Operaria. Well, what was going on when that struggle happened? Oh, that's the past. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the past. We're all about the now. Okay? Well, what did you do when those comrades were attacked by the bourgeois state, which put out an order for the search and seizure of their documents, of their bulletin, of their union leaflet? What did you do? Did you defend them, or did you side with the other side? There is an answer to that. Well, one of the people involved in the ICL's actions, that the ICL now says that we are correct to still be outraged about their actions in 1996. Let me repeat that. That we are correct to still be outraged by their actions in Brazil. In other words, what they were saying for 28 years was a lie. What we were saying was true. Oh, but that's old history, and besides, you're a bunch of hidebound doctrinaires. Oh, really? Were there no consequences? Were there no consequences? Well, I'm going to do this now. Izzy, can you please bring me that poster? Bourgeois state. You've heard of it? It sent one of its agents to the offices of the comrades of the Liga Quarta Internacionalista do Brasil. And they had a search and seizure, right? Order for every copy of the leaflet. This came from a suit which was demanding the names of all of the members of the trade union committee or caucus. And it threatened, the order threatened to seize all of, or was associated with the threat to seize all of the belongings of the caucus and of the union president. And we organized an international defense campaign to try to get unions to support it. We're talking about real people. We're not talking about words on paper. Real people with names, like Jorge Oliveira, the target of this suit. Worked 25 years, a black worker who worked 25 years as a railwayman at the largest steel company in Latin America, which is not a doctrinal invention written on paper. It's not about words on paper. And what did the ICL say? Ação de busca e apreensão. Action for search and seizure. Okay? Right? Unions around the world were signing up to defend them. In South Africa, in El Salvador, and elsewhere on the basis of our work. The ICL tried to stop people from defending them. Is that statement true? Yes, it is true. They called the defense campaign a cynical sham. A cynical sham. And they called the comrades, quote, taking words virtually verbatim from the pro-cop grouping in Volta Redonda, headed by Artur Fernandes. They called them dangerous hustlers. You want to defend a dangerous hustler in a campaign which is a cynical sham? What's your line on this? What's your line on this? Please respond. Now, these workers in this room, when confronted by the ICL, might very well say, well, what do you have to say about that? And the ICL would probably say, well, that was a long time ago. We're all about the now. You ready to follow us now? We betrayed. We betrayed this way, and 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 this way. Now follow us. Because since the 1st of September 2023, when this was published, now it's all okay. You ready to follow us? I don't think so. Well, we're investigating it. Well, one certainly hopes so. One looks forward to seeing the results of those investigations. Now, I want to talk. I'm going to have to actually. How much time do I have left? How much? Okay.
2.5 minutes.
I am going to steal, with the kind permission of the chair, 5 minutes from my summary. So let's talk about, they're going to say, I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, but what about the program? What about, we've been talking about program. Program is real when you fight for it. But what about the revelations in here, okay? Why was, according to them, the Spartacist tendency deformed since birth? Well, Jim Robertson, they say, did not understand the permanent revolution or the national question, and the revisionist, okay, and reactionary positions, et cetera, meant that the Spartacist tendency was deformed from birth. So, a kind suggestion, why don't you change the name of your journal? Change it. Change it. Okay? Well, how is that? Well, we're going to hear about some of that in the second part of the debate. Well, why? What is this all about? What does it come down to? As a pompous SLer used to like to say to me, when the rubber hits the road. Okay? It comes down to the anti-imperialist United Front. And so they have resuscitated something which even most Trotskyists are not particularly aware of, or would be Trotskyists, the Anti-Imperialist United Front from the Fourth Congress of the Comintern, and they're determined to defend the Fourth Congress of the Comintern. And we always used to say, the Fourth Congress that we stand on the first 4 Congresses of the Communist International with reservations on the fourth. The discussion on the workers' government was very confused. The Noviev was all over the map. And what about the theses on the Eastern question? Now, I used to hear about that a lot from Guillermo Lora, head of the Bolivian POR. Why? Because he's got a pamphlet. I can give it to you as a present. A pamphlet called the Anti-Imperialist Front, because he had dug those theses up to justify his class collaboration as Frente Revolucionario Anti-Imperialista with the president, former president of Bolivia. Because in the Trotskyist movement, The theses on the Orient, or Oriental question, excuse me, Eastern question, originally it was called by that term, theses on the Orient. They had not been mentioned at the first Congress of the Fourth International, nor in its documents, nor at the Second Congress, nor in the documents of the SWP, but they were mentioned at the Third Congress by a man called Michel Pablo. Why? In order to justify a political bloc with the Nationalist Party. Well, we would never do something like that, might say the ICL. Mightn't they? Well, they might, but they don't. To the contrary, they want an anti-imperialist front, and they say this. We asked it as a rhetorical question. Well, would the anti-imperialist United Front include the President of Mexico? And they say, why, yes, using a hypothetical, if in the future Mexico were attacked by the US, wouldn't you be for a military bloc with AMLO? We would defend Mexico militarily against US imperialism. Of course we would, okay? But what's happening right now is that he's serving as a border guard for Yankee imperialism, and they rush to his political defense. And one of their main arguments, I found it quite comical. Oh, that's me. Sorry. I found it comical. They said, well, he had 500,000 people at his rally. When I moved to Mexico in the spring of 1988, the president of Mexico, Miguel de la Madrid, from the government party, the PRI, had 1.3 million people at his May Day rally. He must have been an anti-imperialist. Let's make an anti-imperialist United Front with him. Now, how about, is there anywhere in the world where the ICL calls for an anti-imperialist United Front now? Well, it would be nice if Comrade Perrault would answer that, but I can give you at least part of an answer. They said that it was necessary to form an anti-imperialist United Front with the government of Greece in 2015. They say that voting for the maneuver by Syriza, the bourgeois populist nationalist government party of Greece, okay, was necessary. We said, no, this is a maneuver. We're not going to participate in tricking the workers. They're going to capitulate immediately to the bankers, and this is preparation for that. They said, no, you've got to vote for it. But now retroactively, they say, yeah, and guess what? That was an anti-imperialist United Front. And it was necessary to make a common front with the government. With the government. So more will be coming on that. But what if they say, well, wait a minute, some not yet up to speed SLer might get up, or ICLer might get up and say, no, we're talking about the original discussion at the Fourth Congress. We're not talking about now, really. Well, Trotsky said the real historical process invests terms with meaning historically, but let's look back at it. This is the Fourth Congress, Comrade Perrault. Safarov, leader of Comintern work among the peoples of the East, said in the discussion on the thesis on the Eastern question, you can find it in John Riddell's very valuable collection. He said, since the colonial and national revolution is a bourgeois democratic revolution, a bourgeois democratic government in the backward countries provides support and great reassurance for our proletarian movement. Now, is that Stalin? Is that Stalinism? No. The whole struggle in real life in the Second Chinese Revolution of 1925 to 1927, in which the Stalinists used the formula of anti-imperialist United Front, yielded a bloody result through which, indeed, yes, despite your denials, Leon Trotsky extended the theory of permanent revolution internationally. This is why they're doing all this stuff about revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and the past. All the theoretical revisionism and rewriting the history of the Russian Revolution that they're doing, it's got a political purpose. Program does generate theory, you know. What you want guides what you do. So, how about the representative for Iran at the Fourth Congress discussion of those theses? He said, his name was Nikbin, the party in Iran is trying to create a general anti-imperialist alliance It has made an extensive proposal for a democratic, that beloved word, democratic. The ICL is very much in love with that word, democracy, democratic. And yes, we fight for democratic rights, and in the countries of belated capitalist development, the bourgeois democratic tasks can only be carried through by the dictatorship of the proletariat, supported by and resting on the peasants. But he says, the party is trying a proposal for a democratic bloc that is to include representatives of all the national and democratic groups. The bourgeois parties themselves are seeking a bloc with us, said the representative for Iran. But what about China? The representative of the Chinese CP. This is at the 4th Congress.
5 minutes over.
5 minutes over?
You're over your time.
So I've used 10 extra minutes?
No,
Oh, okay. How much, of those 5 minutes, how much do I have? Well, that's it.
You've used 50 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll finish up with this. Starting from the principle that an anti-imperialist front should be established to drive imperialism out of China, said the representative of the Chinese Communist Party at the fourth Comintern Congress discussion on the theses that they uphold. Our party decided to achieve a united front with the National Revolutionary Kuomintang Party. This united front took the form that we joined this party, and we know, don't we, where that led. So let's follow them. I don't think so. Thank you.
I'll start by saying that Comrade Negrete certainly didn't make my job easy. But I'll try to answer as many of the questions, but I'll try also to clarify the confusion, because there's a lot of themes and none of it makes sense, and I don't personally feel much more confused after hearing this report about what the IG thinks about the world. So let's start with the question that was hammered. Why follow us? Well, I'll answer. It's because we're using a dialectical and Marxist analysis to chart a path forward. I'll start with a small example. I made a prediction at the beginning of my report. That was the quote from Trotsky, that the essence of sectarianism consists in measuring historical processes at the scale of one's own group. And this is exactly what we got from Negrete today. It seems like the whole world situation revolves around the disputes between the ICL and LFI. And certainly, we've admitted all these problems with our past and how we've done things. But something that's forgotten in Negrete's presentation is that there was a crisis in the whole left. How did anybody else do in building bridges in this period? Open your eyes. You'll see that the left is in an absolutely pathetic state. Why? There is not a single answer to this question. It's all about these narrow little disputes that most people in the world have no idea about. And honestly, they're not of interest for most people in the world. These little narrow disputes of 30 years ago. The question of building a bridge. It's true, we said, all our bridges are broken, and now what we did is we reevaluated our engineering and now have a new plan on how to make a bridge. The problem is the whole rest of the left has failed to build a bridge, and they're still trying to do the same thing. The LFI has been outside of organizations for almost 30 years. Negrete was able to point to a number of actions that the LFI have done, which are certainly commendable. But in terms of providing revolutionary leadership on the key questions of the epoch, the LFI has utterly failed, and utterly fails today too. Now, I think Comrade Negrete forgot, although he named it, he forgot the theme of this debate, the fight for the Fourth International today. How are we going to move this fight forward? This is the question of today's debate. And you had no answer from Negrete. Let's start with the 3 points I outlined. Reality, the reasons for defeats, and the road for victory. Think about Negrete's presentation. How did he answer these 3 questions? First of all, reality. Oh, so there was a memorandum and there were a few bad formulations. We did some wrong predictions, but that's okay. That doesn't really matter so much. But I'm sorry, to not understand that that US imperialism is hegemonic for the last 30 years, well actually the last 30 years, it's not a little analytical mistake. If you don't understand that, you understand nothing about the world. And you know, Negrete gave a number of examples of times that people justified the world situation to do opportunism. Yeah, that's certainly true. But to think, like if you read Trotsky, if you read the fight for the Trotsky, it's always so clear in all his polemics against Stalinism that his entire critique is rooted in a correct materialist understanding of the world situation. That's not a secondary point, that's absolutely fundamental. And it wasn't just the 92 conference document. These same thing, as I said, look at the LFI's website today. Still to this day, the LFI denies that the post-Soviet world order is defined by the hegemony of the United States. This means it understands nothing. And now it's so obvious that it's breaking down, as Negrete himself said. But if you see it breaking down without understanding how you got there, then you're totally blind. And then you think, oh, the Third World War is coming now. Without understanding the actual laws behind it, the contradictions, how it's evolving in a contradictory and dialectical way. Now, the reasons for defeats. Have you heard a single explanation from Negrete over why the working class has suffered defeats for the last 30 years? Oh, we heard plenty about why the ICL was bad, that's for sure. But why has the working class been defeated for the last 30 years? My presentation provided an explanation for this. It's rooted in the hegemony of the United States and the triumph of liberalism. If you look at the ideology in the workers' movement for the last 30 years, everywhere in the world, it has been defined by the dominance of liberalism, the trade unions, BLM, all the movements. Now, the reasons for defeat. Okay, Negrete pointed out that we didn't write leaflets and that they wrote a lot of leaflets during BLM. True, correct. A lot of other groups wrote leaflets. But Negrete did not answer the question, why was BLM defeated? And what are the lessons to be drawn for today? It's not just a question of writing leaflets. All the left wrote leaflets. And the movement ended in disaster, that's obvious. Why? And what to do now about it? There's no answer about this. This is the fundamental question. How to advance black liberation? How to defeat imperialism in Ukraine? Negrete didn't actually answer this question. How do you actually defeat it? It's okay, we have the right position because of A, B plus C, okay. But actually, if you look at the concretes, actually answer, how do you advance the class struggle in Ukraine right now? The Ukraine army is being massacred. There's discontent that's brewing. There's talks of possible coups in Ukraine. There will be a revolt, but very likely in the Ukrainian army. The question, which direction will it go? Will it be under the communist banner or will it be under the reactionary banner of fascism? But for this to happen, you'll never win the Ukrainian workers to welcome the Russian troops taking over Kharkiv and Kiev. You'll never win them for that. If you want a revolution in Ukraine, you must work towards the unity of Russian and Ukrainian workers. That is the only road. But no, A plus B. And what does that logic get the LFI into? They compare Russia's position in the Ukraine war to Iraq. It's not the same thing when the US, a proxy war is not the same thing as a direct war and it's kind of obvious. It's kind of obvious. We would know if there was an imperialist war between Russia and Ukraine. Between US imperialism and Russia. That's not the same thing as what is happening now. To compare the Russia situation to the situation of China being invaded by Japan is absurd. Now, the road to victory. How do we actually advance Palestine liberation? No answer on this. How do we defend China today? No answer on this. On Palestine, Negrete talked about, asked everybody to stand up that had participated in actions to defend against the witch hunt. In Germany, where the offensive has been the strongest, the LFI has refused to do a united front with us. Now, it's not about, did you come to our demo? That's not the point. The point is that there is an urgent need in Germany for the left and workers' movement that stand in support to Palestine to unite against social democracy and against the offensive. So everybody, including the LFI, can go to the demos for Palestine, say they stand in solidarity, but when it comes to trying to build a united front against this offensive, they refuse. And okay, maybe they don't want to come to our thing or follow our call, but at the last forum, I challenged Negrete, okay, put forward your own call for united front. This question is crucial.
Well, on the liberalism, I would like to ask Comrade Perrault to please define what the ICL means by the word, please, because it's used many, many times in their analysis. They use the term liberalism 51 times in Spartacist. They use liberal 87 times. A very large part of their program consists of saying consists of saying the word liberalism many times and telling people to break from it. Liberalism has a very strong power, almost mystical, magical power to make people do stuff, according to them. It's liberal idealism. The picture that they present of the world in the post-Soviet period is remarkably similar to that of the death of communism triumphalists. Supposedly, apparently, after the destruction of the Soviet Union, there was considerable peace, prosperity, and the growth of productive forces. Okay? Now, there's a bunch of stuff to say about this, but I would like to talk a little bit about what they're doing now. Because they say, we're tired of talking about the past and the self-referential stuff, which is pretty interesting for an organization whose program for the Fourth International, quote unquote, consists overwhelmingly of denouncing itself, right? Vote for us, we were deformed since birth. Jim Robertson, yeah, revisionist schmuck, according to them. It actually pisses me off. But what about what they're doing now? What about Palestine? Well, you compare their leaflet to ours. Compare only death and defeat with Hamas, a revolutionary road, quote unquote, for Palestine liberation. That's the headline. It genuflects to the bourgeoisie and what it demands right at the beginning and repeatedly, just like after 9/11. And what ours has to say: defend the Palestinians against U.S.-Israel genocidal war on Gaza. Drive the Zionists out of the West Bank and Gaza for international workers' action against the attack on Gaza. So please tell me how here in the United States or in Europe or in most places the key task is to dispel illusions in Hamas. Now what about Palestine, where, as the pompous SLer, who's in the room here, used to say all the time, where the rubber hits the road? Well, we've got a very interesting statement in their from their British paper, Workers' Hammer. It says, trade unions must take concrete action to stop arms shipments to Israel. Yeah, that was on October 20th of 2023. The next day, Workers' Vanguard has a supplement in the strike of the auto workers. The auto workers. Okay? Now, I remember that in 1970, some of you do too, I'm sure, that in 1973, 2,000 Arab American auto workers walked out in a protest against Zionism. Dearborn, Michigan is a largely Arab American city. Auto. What do they say? It says, lots of workers are watching the horrors in Gaza and wondering what they can do. The main thing that workers can do to fight for Palestinian liberation is to win this strike. Nothing about stopping arms shipments, nothing about fighting to stop arms shipments, nothing about convincing others to fight to stop arms, nothing about calling for it, but win your strike. Don't be distracted by the genocide in Gaza. Pursue your strike. Yes, they should win their strike, but to separate this in this way and to tell the workers to do nothing, nothing. This is worse than economism. And lastly, I don't know how many minutes I have.
One.
What they're doing now, a revolutionary program for black liberation, unlike BLM, which had liberal demands. Yeah, True, and we expose them. We expose those demands systematically in our press, in our leaflets, in our speeches, in our signs, on the streets, in the meetings, in the unions. We did not collapse ignominiously, which was a capitulation to your own bourgeoisie. I don't give a damn about how messed up you were in your organization. You couldn't bring yourself to put out one leaflet? Nobody should follow you. Your credit is zero. Your credit is zero. But what do they call for in their campaign? What's necessary is a fight that will unite the broadest possible forces. Popular Front language. Okay. I'll take 1 minute, please. Am I allowed to do that or not?
Yeah, you're going to lose it on the summary.
That's fine. Just, yeah. Take motions for opening the police archives. Bring them to your political officials who claim to represent you. We need to mobilize to bring pressure down on all the liberal and progressive politicians who claim to stand for workers and for black rights. Opening the police archives is doable. It's a doable demand. And in fact, can be done by any politician in office that is really on the side of black people. Want some liberalism? It's right here. And what would happen if those archives were opened? Who's going to choose the 100 most heinous cases? The cops? And you believe what's in the cops' archives? Don't you know anything about what cops put in archives? That's what you're doing today. You're trying to spread liberal illusions, and you say that it's exposing them. I heard that from the SWP pretty much every day of the year, and all the other opportunists. Thank you.
Okay, we are now into the discussion period. I'm going to forego the 5 minutes that I was allocated by the two groups to say whatever I wanted to in the interest of trying to provide more time for audience discussion. So the format will be that there will be comment from the ICL from this side of the room, comment from the LFI from this side of the room, and I will then first call on organizations to speak at the middle microphone. I believe we're going in the order of the presenters. So the first comment will be the microphone for the ICL.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Jacob with Spartacus League. I want to try to get back on track a little to the topic of the fight for the Fourth International today. We're supposed to be talking about the necessity of providing revolutionary leadership to the working class because this is the only way that it can advance its interests and even defend itself. Now, this was brutally illustrated during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the bourgeoisie responded to the crisis with methods that flowed from and reinforced their class interests at the expense of workers and the oppressed worldwide. Masses were thrown out of work, confined to their homes. Others were forced to suffer life-threatening conditions where millions died. And our class was subjected to a full frontal attack. Labor's leaders and the entire left bowed down and betrayed, all in the name of national unity and saving lives. Now, the resulting catastrophe for the working class continues to define the political reality we face today. And as such, it is incumbent upon any organization claiming to provide leadership to be clear on what their position in that crisis was and draw the lessons. So, rather than take a side with the liberal bourgeoisie who was posturing as the rational wing of the ruling class and echoing the boss's supposedly scientific justifications for the further immiseration of workers, as the LFI did, the question had to be posed. Who was going to call the shots, workers or the state? Workers needed to fight against the bosses and their state for safe conditions, for control of safety, and they needed to struggle against mass closures and for an expansion of production to meet their safety and healthcare needs. But the prerequisite for that struggle was a revolutionary intervention that could break workers from the saving lives, national unity blackmail peddled by the capitalists and their labor lieutenants, which dictated that nothing could be done but to support the government measures. Revolutionaries had to destroy the lie that the only recourse for workers was to forfeit their lives and livelihoods for the greater good and look to the state as the arbiter of public health. Because during the pandemic, as always, the interests of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat remained irreconcilably counterposed, and the capital state remained a tool for the defense of capital. Now, the ICL made such an intervention, albeit belatedly, when we came out with the Down with the Lockdown statement. And in response to our revolutionary Marxist program, which linked the struggle for workers' immediate needs in the pandemic to the necessity of taking state power, and took head-on the bourgeois blackmail, the LFI called us lunatics. The LFI, like the rest of the left, supported the school closures, which everybody knows were devastating for youth and especially for women and black people. They accepted the lockdowns while bragging about defying them, and they accepted that the state would call the shots. They ridicule us for saying that the labor's leaders betrayed by enforcing the government's diktats. Now, the reality is that the LFI position left the leadership of the workers in the hands of the pro-capitalist bureaucrats who led them to slaughter. While the LFI may occasionally raise this or that demand against the Democrats, listen, they refuse to take on the main obstacle. The LFI's position crossed the class line.
Thank you. And now from the LFI microphone.
I'm Antonio. I'm an immigrant worker. I'm a member of the Internationalist group and also of Trabajadores Internacionales Clasistas. As an immigrant worker, I was recruited by the Internationalist group and among other immigrant comrades on the base of the Leninist Party. You know, knowing what kind of revolutionary party and what kind of program of the Russian Revolution that we had to use to win. I was learning about what happened in Brazil. I read the polemics between the ICL and the IG, you know. But before I was finished reading, I also read Workers' Vanguard, when they said they have a slight correction. You know, they drop the Leninist call of independence for colonies. They say they don't support anymore independence for Puerto Rico. You know, and that's a betrayal. The same thing that they did the betrayal in Brazil, they did in Puerto Rico. That's a betrayal. You know, then it came 9/11. You know, we have the position of defeating U.S. imperialism. What the ICL says, you have that position because you are anti-imperialism. You know, anti-American. You know, while we were organizing guards to defend immigrant workers in Atlantic Avenue.
1 minute.
I was there. I remember very well, you know. And then now they say that the ICL saw at the end the light of the tunnel. But what happened with and they make an investigation. What happened with the comrades in the League Trotskyists of France, the Permanent Revolution faction, comrades, Jura Zakaria, where you start ashamed you know, against these comrades. And I think, you know, you say you're changing, but I think the people who start this shame campaign against these comrades from North Africa, they're still here in this room. So why you say you try to lead for another Russian revolution if you don't have the courage to investigate those people?
Time, please.
Thank you.
I would call on a comrade from the Bolshevik-Leninist Australia.
I would like to emphasize the topic of debate, the fight for the Fourth International today. What an important task. Today, the American empire is in decline. Its world order is in increasing disarray. This poses two roads, one of death, misery, and war, and another of proletarian revolution. So far, this leadership from the Labour Party in Australia, the bourgeois nationalists and the neocolonials have a stranglehold over the workers' movement, which only promises more defeat. It's only by fighting for the Fourth International, not as some abstract idea, but as a genuine instrument, struggle for revolutionary leadership, that we can break the workers' movement away from its current trajectory. How can this be done? This is not done through repeating abstract mantras such as break with the Democrats, break with laborism, or for revolution, as if the working class can be hypnotized into being revolutionary. Absolutely not. Fighting against the illusions currently present in the working class requires putting forward a perspective to advance the workers' movement, to get your hands dirty and utilize the increasing ruptures to drive a wedge between the working class base and the leadership, which at every turn subordinates the workers' struggle to the interests of the capitalist class. Let us look today to Australia, for example. In a bid to stay on top, the US imperialists are leading a drive to war against China, which has manifested through AUK, a military alliance between Britain, the US, and Australia, which promises nothing but misery and ruin. In Australia, this has brought bubbling tensions in the workers' movement and caused some rifts between the workers who oppose this war drive and the Labour Party misleadership who is leading it. But this opposition is being funneled into the left-talking bureaucrats who voice skin-deep opposition to AUK. To this, Bolshevik-Leninist and the Spartacist League of Australia has an answer. Chuck AUKUS hawks out of labour. This call both advances the struggle against AUKUS, as well as exposes the left laborites as preferring their alliance with their war hawk brothers over any anti-war pretension. The LFI opposes this call to chuck them out and charges us with being organizationally and programmatically liquidating into the Labour Party. In fact, this is what the LFI has intervened with in the BL-SLA joint forum in Melbourne and Sydney. But when we put the question to them point blank, what is their strategy to advance the struggle against AUKUS and expose the left laborites? They said absolutely nothing. It is clear today they have no such strategy. Ultimately, it is them who fails the struggle to break workers from such obstacles, not just in Australia, but the world over. The LFI has no perspective to genuinely advance the workers' movement and use grand-sounding declarations and empty denouncements as a cheap replacement for such.
Thank you. The next speakers will be from the ICL, followed by the LFI, followed by the BT.
Tall with the Spartacist League. So the Internationalist Group and the LFI have been in this day too, accusing our statement on the Gaza war, which in the beginning part, if you read it, states very clearly and puts forward a program for how to destroy the Zionist state and defeat imperialism as a capitulation to Zionism and I think the genuflection to imperialism. Why do they say this? Because we have in our headline, Hamas, only means death and defeat, which I would point out is in your statement, very below down, that there's only defeat with Hamas. So what is the beef here? But that's on one hand what you say. On the other hand, you defend the historic Spartacist tendencies line on Israel-Palestine, which is in fact a capitulation to Zionism. And let me explain. The LFI says in their statement, they stand squarely on the side of the Palestinian people, which we have always defended against the Zionist oppressor state and its imperialist patrons who have condemned them to stateless, impoverished existence and exile. Further, you say that Trotskyists opposed the founding of the Zionist state built on the dispossession and mass expulsion of the Arab majority of Palestine. Okay, sounds good. But that's not actually true. The line of Spartacist in 1968 was not opposing the founding of the Zionist state. The SL took a side with Israel in the 48 war in the Nakba and called for a, quote, peace treaty on the basis of the 1949 truce boundary lines. the boundary lines that took 80% over that of Palestinian land, even more than what was in partition. This line put an equal sign between the
1 minute,
Israeli
please.
Jewish nation, which has a right to exist, and the Zionist state that was dispossessing the Palestinians. While the SL did in 1974 change its line on that war, it was not on the basis of rejecting this as an utterly reactionary position, but on supposed new facts in 74. So the SL's historic position was undeniably a capitulation to Zionism. The SL, and you guys uphold this, never approached these wars as national wars where we had to side with the Palestinian Arabs. Do you really think this line doesn't need to be looked at critically? Are you really defending this legacy? That's a big contradiction for communists who say they are fighting for the national liberation of the Palestinians, which obviously you cannot do if you are betraying that struggle and capitulating to Zionism. So yes, we are breaking with that, and it's necessary to do so, to do the task of today, which is to raise the Leninist Trotskyist banner in Palestine and Israel. So that's the purpose of why we're revisiting
Time,
and
please.
correcting his position.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm a member of the Revolutionary Internationalist Youth, the youth group of the Internationalist Group. And it was founded in 2017 and is a training ground for young revolutionaries. And it seeks to win young people from around the US and around the world to the program of Trotskyism. That is, to carry through to victory the genuine communist program of Marx, Lenin, and Trotsky. All of it. Not just bits and pieces, not just the quotes that we like, not revised or redacted versions that make it more acceptable to our national bourgeoisie, but all of it. And since 2017, we have recruited many young people to this program. I joined in 2018 for many reasons, but at first because of the internationalist and revolutionary Marxist position of the independence of Puerto Rico, the oldest colony. And doing so, upholding that position, irrespective of what imperialist pressure and fear tactics has done to the Puerto Rican population. I'm glad you finally readopted that position after how many years? In 2020 and 2021, we grew during our and the internationalist group's daily interventions in some of the largest mass protests against racist police murder. We didn't just write about it, we were there. You could see the photos outside. We defied the lockdowns, as did millions of other people. We were not paralyzed, we were ready. On the question of how can we break something if we don't put pressure on it? Good question. Well, how can you do that, or let alone be the revolutionary leadership of the working class? Through abstention, or through absence. You can't. Most recently, we organized a protest outside of Hunter College against McCarthyite witch hunts
1 minute, please.
currently being waged against defenders of Palestinians and those willing to mobilize against this US-Israel war. Sectarian Us invited the SL to do that and to speak. And what did you do? Echoed imperialist propaganda again and accused the left of tailing Hamas. But you're used to echoing imperialist talking points. You do that with China. So you've seen the present-day ICL, multi-time betrayers. If you want to see what a real revolutionary organization looks like, come by our table. And lastly, you say that we will try to say that the ICL has made nothing but mistakes. You do that all on your own, many times. And you're right. You have, and not just with formulations or saying a instead of an, but on key questions, decisive questions, on what will make or break a socialist revolution here or anywhere. And on leaflets, they're important. What do those leaflets say? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker from the BT.
Tom Riley for the Bolshevik Tendency. Today's event is significant in our view because, as we wrote in The Road to Jimstown, Spartacus League was not just one left grouping among many. It was the crystallization of the left-wing opposition to the political destruction by Pavlovite revisionism of the Revolutionary Socialist Workers' Party, a party built by James P. Cannon and trained by Leon Trotsky. The qualitative superiority of the RT-SL over every other current claiming the mantle of Trotskyism was demonstrated first by its correct analysis of the Cuban Revolution and subsequently confirmed by its positions on many other programmatic questions through the 1960s and 70s. But something went seriously awry with the SL, and it's vital to identify what went wrong and how that happened. We think that the Montreal Collective, now running the SL, is mistaken in seeing the RT as programmatically flawed from the beginning, and is also very wrong to reject the SL's important contributions on the national question, as we outlined in our document, In Defense of Seymour's Marxism. The IG has correctly criticized the SL's historical pessimism, scholastic passivity, and introversion after the August 1991 triumph of capitalist counter-revolution in the Soviet Union. But the IAG is wrong to pretend that all was well in the House of Robertson prior to their own removal in 1996. The leaflet we distributed today highlights some of the more egregious examples of the SL's political degeneration over the course of the 1980s. Some of these grew out of the desire to avoid the wrath of the US ruling class, like Perrault Dobbs in 1963 with his cringing letter of condolence to Jackie Kennedy. There were also significant deviations on the Russian question, ranging from the Stalinophilic adulation of Yuri Andropov, who oversaw the crushing of the 1956 Hungarian workers' political revolution, to flinching when Soviet defensism was acutely opposed, as in the case of the termination of the KL-007 spy flight in 1983. The IG was indeed framed up in 1996, but there were a lot of earlier frame-ups, including ours in Toronto and that of Bill Logan in 1979. There's also the issue of moral corrosion is manifested also by the resort to slander. The Healyites first denounced the SL as the fingerman of world capitalists in 1968 before denouncing Joe Hansen as a gay PU agent later. Today, the SL can take an important step forward in our view by retracting the calumnies against both the IG and the BT comrades as provocateurs. You know that was wrong. If you tell the simple truth, you'll be setting a good example for the IG, which should also repudiate the slanders published in WV when it was edited by Jan Norden. A rigorous and serious discussion of our common political history is not only long overdue, but in our view is essential for forging the revolutionary cadres of the future.
Thank you. The next in line after the two groups speak will be the Platypus, the IBT, and the Freedom Socialist Party. So if you want to prepare.
Hi, my name is Sky. I'm with the ICL. The Internationalist Group has made a number of points protesting their expulsion from the party and complaining about our attempts to correct our previous mistakes. But what was our real crime? Comrades must look at this question in the broader framework. The real crime was to give up on the struggle for giving revolutionary leadership to the working class in the post-Soviet period, which was dominated by neoliberalism and hegemonic US imperialism, something to this day the IG refuses to recognize. So, you know, from even including the question of the pandemic, which the IG refused to oppose, you know, the lockdowns and fight against the existing liberal leadership of the labor movement on every question. One of the things that has been raised here is the expulsion of Norden, or, you know, the role of Norden's speech in Germany in 1995. Well, you know, the Internationalist Group correctly criticized our criticisms of Norden, but both sides missed the key question, which is we had to fight to defend Trotskyism against social democracy in the post-Soviet period in order to split off part of the KPD PDF and win them over to Trotskyism. That is this part of German social democracy which formed Die Linke and which today is a major obstacle for the left in Germany and for revolutionaries in Germany. When we sought to overcome this obstacle by calling to throw the NATO supporters out, the Internationalist Group denounced us. So, you know, similarly in Brazil, did we pull our hands out of the boiling water? Yes. As we have stated, we are investigating that. But the key question here is that neither side had the program to give revolutionary leadership to the anti-colonial struggle. This is the only road forward to split the Popular Front, to fight for women's liberation and for black liberation, by fighting for liberation of the anti-imperialist struggle in opposition to the nationalists. This essential question was not in the program of either side in the 1990s, and it remains an essential question today. So, you know, from the IBT to the BT to the Internationalist Group, there's all these questions about, like, who is defending the original Spartacism? Well, what is the meaning of this? You know, the purpose of Spartacism is to defend the lessons of the Russian Revolution, which is proven to be the only program to this day that has brought the working class to power. You know? So the purpose of this Spartacist is to point a path forward, how to provide revolutionary leadership in response to the concrete situations today faced by the workers' movement, which is actually the true question and lesson of the Bolshevik Revolution and of Bolshevism. So in reviewing our past, the purpose of the ICL is to propose a path forward to build the Fourth International, and that is why we insist so much on this issue of Spartacist, because that is where those answers are. So, you know, I would urge comrades, when you listen to the IG and when you listen to the IBT, to really look at what their answer is, because they are not putting forward any answer to the revolutionary problems of the proletariat and the oppressed in this day and age.
Speaker for the...
My name is Charlie Grover. I was in the SL for nearly 14 years.
Can't hear you, really.
Can't hear me? Closer? Okay. My name is Charlie Grover. I was in the SL for nearly 14 years, elected to the Central Committee, International Committee, Associate Editor of Workers' Vanguard, founding co-chairman of the Partisan Defense Committee, now a member of the Class Struggle Education Workers, programmatically aligned with the Internationalist Group. I followed the astonishing degeneration of my former party with some sadness as it spun off the rails of revolutionary Trotskyist politics, including its lockdown derangement and retreat from meaningful political activity. The SL taught me what a fighting propaganda group was, and then they stopped fighting. As they shed one Spartacist position after another, they found ideological villains in their midst. Those old Bolsheviks, Seymour and Rubin, comrades who recruited me away from academia, publicly run over by the SL's careening centrist bus. The ICL's degeneration culminated in their Amazing Grace confessional, where they proclaimed Spartacism blind and wrong and centrist for 30 years, if not from birth. But now we're told they've seen the light. You know those courtroom movies where the jailhouse snitch witness reverses all his prior testimony? In this case, the cross-examining lawyer should ask the SL, were you centrist then, or are you centrist now? The SL's testimony can no longer be trusted. But their intellectual dishonesty lies not in their renunciation of their own revolutionary tradition. About that, the born-again ICL is perfectly clear and forthright. No, their dishonesty lies in their cynical attempt to drag the IG along into its morass of admitted betrayals. Brazil, Germany, Haiti, Puerto Rico, wholesale capitulation to liberalism, and a lot more. We all done it is the last refuge of the morally bankrupt. But the fact is the LFI didn't do it. Anyone honestly considering the two organizations must understand that the LFI was not similarly stricken with centrist blindness, did not surrender the program of revolutionary leadership and working class independence and internationalism on all those same issues. Remember this, when Marjorie and Jan and Negrete were booted out of the SL in an unprincipled purge, now admitted at last by the SL, they did not have the advantages of the Spartacist name and reputation, no press, no locals, no multi-million-dollar building in Tribeca, but they had the power of the Trotskyist program that built the vibrant organization here today. For this old man, the IG's deeply Marxist youth have renewed my hope for a bright socialist future, even in this dark world.
The speaker from Platypus.
My name is Erin Haygood, oh, that's loud, and I am the current president of the Platypus Affiliated Society. It is to the great credit of the Revolutionary Tendency in inheriting the tasks and project of Trotsky that it was able to, in its time, show that those who claimed Marxism were in fact the greatest enemies of Marxism, and that the obstacle to the renewal and the memory of orthodox Marxism in its time was the left, those who claimed its legacy. I have heard nothing from either speaker really today about what it would mean to claim the legacy of orthodox Marxism today. I think if we're talking about a fight for the Fourth International today, that should be, in fact, the first question. What does it mean to be an orthodox Marxist today? What are the obstacles to orthodox Marxism today, on the left as well as elsewhere? And what are the tasks of an orthodox Marxist today? The comrade from the LFI, raised the legacy of Jim Robertson, which the ICL is now calling reformist and revisionist. I would like to pose, what is the legacy of Jim Robertson and the revolutionary tendency? What would it actually mean to take up the necessity of clarifying the task and meaning of orthodox Marxism, revolutionary Marxism in the present? I hope that both organizations and others would answer these types of questions. Thank you.
Speaker for the ICL.
All right. John from the SL. Okay. The speaker from the LFI challenged our assertion that liberalism became the predominant ideology in the post-Soviet period. Yes, it did, and there's a simple reason. Karl Marx said the ideas of the ruling class are, in every epoch, the ruling ideas. The US imperialists won the Cold War and proclaimed the triumph of liberal bourgeois democracy. Now, if you don't recognize the primacy of liberalism in this period, you end up tailing it, as the LFI does today. You do it through opportunism. Examples of your tailing of Neely, you're solidarizing with the liberal pro-Palestinian solidarity milieu, your support to the bourgeoisie's lockdowns, and your tailing of BLM. You also do it through sectarian means. And a very good example is your refusal to participate in our police archives campaign. Far from us pushing liberalism, what you are doing is protecting the liberals, because we are making a demand that these politicians come out against the cops with whom they overwhelmingly work. And you don't want to put them to the test. You're protecting those people. Now, finally, I want to say something about your disgraceful disfigurement of the history of the RT and the founding of the Spartacist League. You talked about our struggle against the SWP on Cuba. What was it about? Please. Cuba, what the SWP was doing was becoming a cheerleader for Castro and Cuban Stalinism. That is exactly what you people are doing in China, with your completely uncritical support to the policies of the Chinese Stalinist bureaucracy. And on the black question, what the RT fought for was an independent communist leadership for black liberation, not to be cheerleaders for liberal black movements or the civil rights movement. That is exactly the opposite of what you do when you tail BLM.
Speaker for the LFI.
Yari, IG. In your March article for Black Trotskyism, you write that the SL rejected the need to fight for leadership of the struggle for black liberation, that you refused to fight for the Trotskyist program for revolutionary integrationism, and that this amounted to a betrayal. Your paper is littered with all sorts of betrayals, okay, that you've committed, some concocted for internal purposes, but this betrayal is true. The SL collapsed and put forward absolutely no program responding to the racist police murder of George Floyd. This amounted to a capitulation, okay, to the bourgeoisie, because betrayals are not mistakes. It's class treason. Understand? No amount of public self-flagellation in your paper will exonerate you from your political bankruptcy on the black question in the United States. We, the IG, have consistently fought for black liberation through socialist revolution. We say that only revolution can bring justice, because there is no justice in capitalist America. You smear at this slogan, writing that it's as true as it is sterile. But you kept your hands clean by, in your own words, capitulating to the lockdowns and racist curfews imposed by the Democrats, while we marched and mobilized labor against racist police and fascist terror. Now you seek to create fanciful illusions in the bourgeoisie, to then expose those very illusions, like calling to unite the broadest possible forces to bring pressure down on all the liberal and progressive politicians who claim to stand for workers and for black rights, and to open all the police archives. Why? Because opening the police archives is doable, and in fact can be done by any politician in office that's really on the side of black people. Do you really think that opening the police archives would bring some kind of justice? We're for the right of armed black self-defense, for the militant organized power of the working class, and for the formation of a revolutionary working class party to fight for the liberation of the oppressed through socialist revolution. You are for a liberal pressure campaign. That's what fake leftists do. You were silent as the grave in 2020, and now you want to create your own fake movement, a popular front with capitalist politicians to open the police archives. Your actual betrayals keep multiplying day by day, and you want to trivialize that. To you, everyone betrays. Don't insult our intelligence as if we can't read or trust what we see with our own eyes. The SL and IG are nothing alike, and
please.
People see that immediately.
Speaker for the IBT.
I'm Bill Logan, and I'm from the International Bolshevik Tendency. We propose a deepening of the programmatic struggle amongst us to reforge and develop the International Spartacist Tendency. Debates like this one contribute, but we need something more sustained. I hope you've seen our open letter and the ICL's response. To understand the programmatic problems of today, you must understand their origins in the past. In the 1970s, fueled by a kind of apocalyptic optimism characteristic of that period, we did some very fine work. For example, through hard programmatic struggle, and not least on the question of Ireland, we recruited significant layers from Alan Thornett's Workers' Socialist League. There was a veteran of Free Derry and another from the Republican stronghold of Crossmaglen. They saw how in Northern Ireland British imperialism is the bourgeois order, and neither imperialism nor capitalism can be smashed without smashing the other. And that requires opposition to privileging either side of the sectarian divide. They saw that the imperialist system can be defeated only by a centering of a class struggle approach. Not green against orange, but class against class. But you know, by the mid-70s, there was a collapse of the optimism, and the contradictions of Jim Robertson loomed larger. He was actually acutely aware of his own increasingly disproportionate role, and also of his alcoholism. He sometimes became irresponsible when disinhibited by alcohol, and sometimes peremptory and abusive Look at the goat fucker speech and the Polanski dispute. So there was an apolitical degrading of people. The most authoritative woman in the organization, a layer of Marxist intellectuals called the cloned youth. There was the removing by fiat of the leadership of the British section. This all left the organization seriously less capable of maintaining a revolutionary program. And we must find some way to get beyond the problems that have their origin back then. We must look at the whole thing, however,
Time, please.
as a whole.
I'm Cairo from the Spartacus League. I wanted to touch on a couple things. I wanted to touch on Negrete accusing our intervention into the UAW strike of economists. Our whole intervention from the very beginning, when we put forward the program of no tears, reindustrialization, and black liberation in the UAW strike, was to actually fight against the economism of Sean Fain, who is putting forward that you could turn the tide for the working class and actually advance the interests of the working class by economic struggle alone. As you well know, fighting for black liberations means you have to go up right against the interests of the capitalists, and we have to show that the workers' struggle and the black struggle needs to be fused together in order to actually advance the struggle and go against capitalist interests. So when we say in that leaflet that you put forward, the best thing that the UAW workers can do right now is for Palestinian liberation is to win this strike, is what we're saying they need to deal a blow against imperialism, against capitalist interests. That is the best thing they can do for the Palestinians right now. But I don't think you can conceive of that, because the only way that you can conceive of this class battle that was supposed to happen was in the terms of the bureaucracy, of what Sean Fain was putting forward. Our whole thing that we were putting forward was to smash his narrow economism and put forward that this battle needs to be waged like an actual clash of class interests. That is what we mean in that statement. Another thing I want to touch on is a comrade who spoke over there about our police archives campaign. Because I think we need to go back to what the theme of this debate is, whether it be about the UAW, the police archives thing, is how do you guide the day-to-day struggles of the working class, and how do you actually drive a wedge between the leadership, the dominant ideology, and the base? Because our whole purpose of our campaign is to expose to the black masses and the working class that these liberals, politicians, and everyone else is not on their side. Yes, we want the police archives to be open. Are these liberal politicians going to do it? No, and we know that, but we're trying to expose it to the black masses and the working class that these people are their enemy.
1 minute, please.
So again, I want to raise the question again. What do you guys put forward for the UAW strike? For the black struggle? Because really, it just seems to be a lot of abstract formulas, but nothing. How do you actually guide the struggle today? How do you actually put a wedge between the masses and the leadership? Because right now, you're really just offering socialist revolution. Okay, yes, obviously that's how you emancipate people, but what should people be doing today?
Speaker for the LFI.
Hi, I'm a supporter of Class Struggle Workers Portland, and I want to talk about fighting for a class struggle program and what that looks like in practice now, because that's what we're doing in Portland. First, I just wanted to say that as we speak, the Port of Oakland has been shut down by 3,000 pickets in protest against the war on Gaza. All cargo has been stopped, and the workers are preparing for a possible showdown later today. And I just wanted to take a minute to salute those pickets, because that's what we mean when we talk about class struggle, by the way. You might have seen the poster outside featuring a resolution that was proposed by members of the Class Struggle Workers Portland, and it passed both in the Iron Workers Local 29 and Painters Local 10 in Portland. It calls for labor to refuse to handle war goods in solidarity with Palestinian trade unions' call for labor to stop shipments of arms to the U.S.-Israel war on Gaza. That's what we mean when we talk about class struggle. We're talking about getting workers actively involved where their power lies, in their workplaces, organizing together to stop the shipment of war goods. That's what we're doing. But I want to dial back to where all of this stuff came from, because these resolutions didn't just come out of nowhere. To understand where they actually came from, it's important to look back to August of 2016, when the Painters Union in Portland, Local 10, at the behest of class struggle workers, supporters, passed a resolution to break with the Democrats and all parties of the bosses. And this is important because labor's allegiance to the Democrats in the US is a major impediment to class struggle here, right? Like the leadership's actual ties to the Democratic Party are what often forces the unions to capitulate to the demands of the Democratic Party, a ruling class party. After that resolution, there were several other actions that took place
1 minute, please.
in Portland. So on June 4th of 2017, when the Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys staged a provocation in Portland, they were met with hundreds of workers from at least 14 area unions who effectively stopped them from marching. They boxed them in. In 2020, when mass protests erupted following the murder of George Floyd, Class Struggle Workers Portland organized several contingents of workers to intervene in the class struggle, not to tail it, but to actually go out into the streets and have those political arguments inside of our union halls and in the streets, instead of staying on the sidelines and calling the protesters liberals like the ICL would have us do. As Democratic Mayor tear gas Teddy Wheeler gassed protesters every single day, federal, state, county, and local police snatched protesters from the streets. Class struggle workers, Portland, and the IG stood on the side of class struggle against racist police murder and in solidarity with the protesters being beaten.
The speaker next for the Freedom Socialist Party, and after that, I will be calling on independents. If we have time, Don C., Bryce, and Gershom.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Durham from the Freedom Socialist Party. There are many things that we do share with you: canonism, revolutionary integration, and Pabloism being one of the key factors for the degeneration of the Fourth International under the leadership of Ernest Mandel. There are also differences that we have that many in this room, if they know anything about us, our website, socialism.com, there are differences we have over permanent revolution and its application. But we agree that permanent revolution is one of the key, the misapplication, the misinterpretation, and the absolute abandonment of permanent revolution really does explain a lot of the problems in our movement, which is really is in huge crisis. And we look forward to reforging it. One of the things that we're doing is that we have a committee for international revolutionary regroupment, and we're working with parties in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and the US. I want to also say that we are going into a very difficult period. It's been difficult for many decades. Many of us carry the problems of the decades. I'm glad to see there's some recognition of mistakes. The FSP can recognize its mistakes as it has. And that's a basis for really working together, and we hope this meeting leads to something that's productive. At the end, though, it's really important that one of our big debates in the left, debates in the movement or overall, is that what the left does is extremely important. And that is something that we fight the Stalinists with. They act like it's just are the movement people. So, and even the Fourth International in its complete degeneration. So what the left does is important, and what the left does also when we come under attack is important. I want to say we appreciate here in New York City the Spartacus League coming to a forum that we held that was attacked by the JDL, got a death threats, had to move it. So that kind of thing is extremely important despite we have the differences. And working together with respectful and debate across differences is what the FSP stands for. Thank you.
Speaker for the ICL.
Hello, my name is Vincent. Comrade Negrete did its speech saying, imagine we are a group of workers we want a leadership and we're pretty radical, you know? And he made his case in terms of, we'll judge between the ICL and the LFI. And he said, the ICL cannot be trusted because look at all the bad things they did in the 1990s, in the 2000s, they've written this or that. Well, Comrade Negrete, like, two things. First of all, I think the workers quite like that the ICL is actually honest about its past. It actually looks at its mistakes head on, doesn't polish them, and is straightforward about what we missed. And you know what? The problems and the mistakes of the ICL are also the problems and the mistakes of the entire left. Why is the left so small, so tiny, so sclerotic? Explain that to me, you know? That's the problem of this epoch, and we actually try to respond to it. Workers might think, these people have an explanation to something, but the LFI just ignores the problems, ignores the thing, and we will only talk about the tertiary event that happened between our two tiny organizations. Second, Negrete has forgotten that what matters for radical workers who are engaged in a struggle, it is what to do. What to do today, how to move the struggle forward. And I think the presentation were quite different on that matter. On the one side, you had little regurgitation about all sorts of tertiary problems which are completely divorced from the last 30 years and the great questions of the revolutionary movement today. And on the other, you had a presentation that actually showed on Palestine, on the Black liberation struggle, on Ukraine, what are the key tasks for revolutionaries to move forward today. And so a lot of speakers are coming up saying, from the LFI saying, oh yeah, BLM, we were there, we put out leaflet. Look, our speaker just showed, one person of you said, maybe you should check what the leaflets say. Yeah, they say that what the ILWU did was great. And another speaker just got up saying that there's an action going on right. I'm sorry, who leads the ILWU Local 10? A bunch of pro-democratic party, social democrat that needs to be overthrown. And your leaflet are saying, oh, it's great what they're doing. Yeah, they're reformists, but it's great. That's not fighting for revolutionary leadership. So here's the thing, comrades of the LFI. This debate is called the Fight for the Fourth International Today. And we provided a response. You looked at the past. We have a program for the present and for the future. And we use our mistakes of the past, we're very honest about them, to push that forward. That's what revolutionary Platypus, that's what orthodox Marxism is today.
Okay, so next we have a remote intervention from Cerezo, from the Liga Quarta Internacionalista do Brasil.
Gostaria de contar pouco sobre uma luta histórica aqui no Brasil e o que a LCI fez em 1996 e depois disso. A campanha para expulsar os guardas municipais do SFPMDR teve conexão com a luta contra a Frente Popular do PT e a opressão racial. Por exemplo, trouxemos para o Brasil a campanha Mobilizar o Poder Operário para a Libertação de Mumia Abu Jamal. Essa luta foi feita sobre a base de nossa experiência nas grandes greves dos metalúrgicos, muitas delas sob a ditadura militar e a de 88, a qual os trabalhadores ganharam apesar da repressão do Exército, que culminou com o assassinato de 3 operários. Fomos os primeiros e até agora os únicos a pôr na prática a palavra de ordem trotskista. Policiais de nenhum tipo que fazem parte da classe operária e devem ser expulsos dos sindicatos. Com a mobilização sistemática dos trabalhadores, realizamos esta campanha e agora é parte da história da luta pela classe internacional. O irônico foi que essa mesma LCI, que nos encorajou, acabou exigindo que os camaradas desistissem da campanha e abandonassem o sindicato e, além disso, saíssem da cidade de Volta Redonda. Como, obviamente, não aceitamos essa posição vergonhosa, a LCI rompeu as relações fraternais conosco, exatamente um dia antes da Assembleia, e mobilizamos para que os operários votassem pela expulsão dos guardas. Aquela Assembleia foi reprimida. Apesar do abandono da LCI, continuamos a campanha e os guardas foram expulsos pela votação dos trabalhadores. A LCI ainda tentou dar cobertura à sua traição de classe, lançando uma calúnia sórdida depois da outra. Muitas tomadas do grupo anticomunista, pró-policial e Volta Redonda, que tentou esmagar a campanha. A LFI chegou ainda ao extremo de tentar impedir os sindicatos no Brasil e em outros países de nos defender. Aproveitando nossa experiência, lembramos da luta para expulsar os guardas, a luta contra as guerras imperialistas, a luta contra o racismo e a opressão racista e a da mulher, e todos os crimes da burguesia brasileira. Criamos a Liga Quarta Internacionalista do Brasil, uma das seções fundadoras da LFI, e é parte da luta que fazemos com as demais seções da LFI para reforjar o Partido Mundial da Revolução Socialista de Trotsky.
Okay, I'm translating Comrade Cerezo's remark. I would like to tell a little about a historic struggle here in Brazil and what the ICL did in 1996 and subsequently. The campaign to expel the municipal guardas or police from the SFPMVR, the Volta Redonda Municipal Workers Union, was connected to the struggle against the PT's Workers' Parties, against their Workers' Party and racial oppression. For example, we brought the campaign to mobilize workers' power to free Mumia Abu-Jamal to Brazil. The struggle to remove the police was carried out on the basis of our experience in the huge strikes by the metal workers, many of them under the military dictatorship, and the one in 1988, which we, the workers, won despite the repression unleashed by the army, which culminated in them murdering 3 workers. We were the first, and up to now the only ones, to have put into practice the Trotskyist slogan, "Police of all kinds are not part of the working class and must be expelled from the unions." Through systematic mobilization of the workers, we carried out this campaign, which is now part of the history of the fight for the Fourth International. What is ironic is that the ICL, which had encouraged us at first, wound up demanding that the comrades stop the campaign, abandon the union, and furthermore leave the city of Volta Redonda. Since obviously we did not accept this shameful position, the ICL broke fraternal relations with us exactly 1 day before the union assembly we had mobilized so that the workers would vote to carry out the expulsion of the police. That assembly was repressed, but despite this and the ICL's abandonment of the struggle, we continued the campaign and the police were expelled by the workers' vote. Yes, the ICL tried to cover up its betrayal.
1 minute, please.
Launching one sordid slander after another, many of them taken up from the pro-police anti-communist grouping in Volta Redonda that tried to crush the campaign. The ICL even went so far as to try to stop unions in Brazil and other countries from defending us. Using the experience we have gained, we remember the struggle to expel the police, the struggle against imperialist wars, the struggle against racism and racial oppression and women's oppression, and all the crimes of the Brazilian bourgeoisie to create the Liga Quarta Internacionalista do Brasil, Fourth Internationalist League of Brazil, one of the sections of the LFI, part of the fight that we, together with the other sections of the LFI, are carrying out to reforge Trotsky's World Party of Socialist Revolution.
Okay, I'm going to call on Don. Don C., is he here?
Hello, my name is John Holmes.
Excuse me, John. No, I'm
Wrong
not
John.
calling on you. I'm calling on Don.
Don.
Don C.
Don.
My name is Don C. I'm a retired rebel worker and a former member of the ICL. To say that the working class needs revolutionary leadership is to say everything and nothing at the same time. And that is what the ICL does, okay? It's a bombastic cause that's supposedly militant, okay? But let me ask this, okay? Because the old Spartacus League gained a great deal of respect, carrying out exemplary actions and exemplary interventions, okay? You cry that the left and even your own comrades capitulated to the national unity during the pandemic, but the ICL has important supporters in key union locations and in important industry like transportation. What did these people do? Did they intervene in their locals for labor action? Did they get past, try to attempt to pass motions? They did nothing. Nothing, comrade. Even your supporter now in IOW Local 10, okay, runs on a platform.
1 minute, please.
Runs on a platform of dumbing down slogans to the workers, okay, and then a gimmick call for black liberation, okay. That is bullshit, comrade. That is not exemplary work. That's what they call dodging the IOW bureaucracy, because the thing that would really make them upset is if your comrade in the campaign raised a call to hot cargo military goods, but instead she ran a campaign in which one would not know that there was a war going on in Gaza, that thousands of Palestinian Arabs were being killed.
The speaker for the ICL.
All right, this is how we demonstrated revolutionary leadership. And it was with our Neely Penny statement, which some of your members called racist. But what happens when you call our statement racist and give no answer to the issue of crime or to defend working class self-defense? You fuel the destructive racial polarizations in society. What was happening in the city at this moment? The anti-racist liberals were dividing the class along racial lines by saying Neely's death was a racist attack. They told the working class that expressing any concern on crime, or if they even defended themselves from an attack by a mentally ill person, they were either uncompassionate or racist. Ignoring the issue of crime will only push the working class, both black and white, into the arms of reaction. You can see the beginnings of it now. It's why many of the workers, seeing no revolutionary alternative, voted for Eric Adams in the first place, because he campaigned on a platform of law and order, especially in the subways. Every day the working masses are crushed by the bosses, then to go home to dilapidated apartments if they haven't caught on fire or collapsed yet. And in between, they gotta take public transit where they have to fight off attackers who either wanna rob them or push them on the tracks. And in between, they gotta worry about if their train car derails. Seriously, have you not taken the train to see what goes on down there? Have you not spoken to the working masses who take the trains, who are forced to face the rot created by the capitalists? Because let me tell you, the working class sentiment was, finally someone got involved. Especially transit workers who deal with these hazards every day. But no, that didn't go along with the anti-racist liberal narrative, so they made it seem as if Neely was performing. Penny went up behind him and killed him because of the color of his skin. When that's not the case at all.
Try to attempt to pass.
Neely wasn't friendly. Ask anyone who was on the train that day. And here's the thing though, Neely did not deserve to die. But Penny had the right to self-defense and to defend the people on the train. And by placing the blame on them, you alibi those who were actually responsible for the Neelys and Pennies out there. That's the bourgeoisie.
1 minute, please.
This is the issue of crime that was taken up. On one hand, you have the liberals who tell the workers to ignore crime, turn the other cheek, eat the abuse. And then you have the right wing who acknowledges crime, but their answer is vigilantism, both which only fuels racial polarizations. It was the task of communists to cut through this racial division, expose how both these programs have no answer to the working class, both black and white. We needed to expose the right, but show that it wasn't liberal compassion nearly needed. He needed housing, employment, healthcare, which is nothing you could get from the capitalist system because it's in repeated economic and social decay. And these aren't any gains you can win with the program of the anti-racist liberal, because they only try to curb the worst excesses of capitalism while trying to beg the masses to be nice to the people they oppress. And I want to add that the scaffolding to the statement where the Bernard Goetz articles written by Jan Norden. Weird that you don't even make a peep on that. Is it because you fall into the trap of liberal hysteria that has gripped this city? Or you want to tell and not alienate the liberals around?
Time, please.
Next, we have another remote speaker, Jack Heyman, supporter of the IGLFI and a longtime militant in the West Coast ILWU Longshore and Warehouse Union.
Yes, yeah. Start the time.
Start it. You have to start the time because this is taking up time.
Ignoring the issue will only push both black and white into the arms of reaction. You can see the beginnings of it now. It's why many of the workers, seeing no revolutionary alternative, voted for Eric Adams in the first place because he campaigned on a platform of law and order, especially in the subways.
Yeah, we'll have another LFI speaker, but your time is going to be reduced. Say 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Mar. I'm a part of Revolutionary Internationalist Youth. In the recent pamphlet called The LFI Chooses Sectarianism, the ICL says that they would make a united front with Mexico's bourgeois nationalist president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, to fight against US imperialism. Throughout history, we have seen the anti-imperialist united front be used to justify chaining the proletariat to the bourgeoisie. This class collaborationist united front in Mexico would be no different. It is illusory to claim that AMLO, the lapdog of Washington, is fighting against US imperialism. In his time in office, AMLO has sent over 30,000 soldiers and elements of the National Guard to Mexico's northern and southern borders to violently stop the flow of immigrants into the US. These immigrants come from countries that have been devastated by imperialism.
1 minute, please.
The troops on Mexico's borders are the beck and call of the US. Just last month, after a meeting with President Biden, AMLO sent troops to destroy a migrant encampment in Matamoros, Mexico. To tell the Mexican working class that a struggle against imperialism can be fought and won with AMLO or any Mexican bourgeois politician is to deceive and betray them, something the SL has done time and time and time again, and goes against the Marxist principle of class independence. A struggle against imperialism in Mexico would necessarily be a struggle against capitalism, and only an independent working class that is free from illusions in their bourgeois politicians can win that struggle.
The last speaker I'm going to have on this round is Bryce. Is Bryce here? An independent? Yes.
Hello, my name is Bryce. I've been sitting here kind of observing some of the conversations being had. I have a couple of rhetorical questions that you can either answer out loud or answer for yourself that I think are relevant to being a Marxist. I think first and foremost, would you personally define liberalism as a bourgeois conception? And if your answer is yes, which I hope it is, would you then consider that it would be a waste of time to focus specifically on liberalism rather than tearing down the bourgeois apparatus, which there's only one way to do, correct? On the question of what type of actions to take, I have heard a lot of members of one side of the room declare that there are specific actions that must be taken for us to build working class power, yet they have not named what those are, which hopefully people in this room, all of them know, but if they do not, I think it would be materially helpful to either describe them or physically take part in such actions. You know, as we know, the only way to actually agitate with working class people and to show them that we have a correct program or that we are politically effective is to take part in struggle, which means that we need to physically be there. The last thing that I'm going to make a note about is this question of race and identity being something that is noted upon as being a liberal conception. I think that specifically around Jordan Neely or any issue dealing with the race of a mentally ill and sick individual, thank you, that I would say that they do not deserve death, that they would not be the kind of person that we would admonish and describe as, you know, I guess like a criminal based upon the bourgeois system, that they deserve life instead of being criticized. I had other things to say, but I wasn't actually ready to speak yet, so I apologize.
Thank you. Okay, in the interest of keeping on our very tight schedule, we'll start the summary now with the LFI speaking first with 8 minutes and 20 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to just mention that among the things that the ICL says that it's going to investigate and that we are waiting to hear the results of are the trials. The trial of Comrade Socorro and the trial that was going to be held of Comrades Jan and Marjorie. I want to send greetings to Comrade Socorro of the Internationalist Group, the founder of our organization, and to protest here yet again against the filthy trial which you staged against her. Some of you are here in this room. We want to know what was unprincipled about that trial. And if you say everything, that's true, but you don't get away with just that. And if it's maybe ancient history to you and not so important, perhaps that's because you were on the dishing out end and not the receiving end. Similarly, when Comrade Vincent says that the ICL, at least it admits the mistakes. I call this the Boy Scout defense. Hey, everybody makes mistakes, but we admit it. You get merit badges for it. No. Well, what I will say about that is you've had a lot of practice, haven't you, in terms of your so-called mistakes. But there's one little problem. According to us, and according to you, they were not mistakes. They were betrayals. They were betrayals. Now, have you ever been on the receiving end of a betrayal? I mean a political, social one, in the class struggle. Well, the comrade from Brazil just talked about what that was about. That was a real struggle. It was a struggle to bring the program of Trotskyism into practice. Now, unbelievably, we heard here today that the so-called real crime, was not that sort of thing, right? Not that sort of thing, but failing to understand the documents and the power of the documents from 1992 and so on and so forth. This is the memorandum theory of history yet again. Well, the very powerful documents magically made you do one thing and us do the other. You say, well, they both voted for the documents and they're both the same. The IG and the LFI is both the same. The IG fought and the LQB fought to throw the police out of the Union. And you fought to stop it. You told them to stop. Why? The memo made us do it. Well, funny that this powerful memo made us do the opposite. How about 9/11? How about 9/11? We called to defeat U.S. imperialism. We marched in the streets with that slogan. We called for worker strikes against the war. Was that an abstract slogan? According to you, it had no resonance. We took it onto the docks. We took it onto the docks as the Iraq War was ramping up. This is not an abstract, hidebound theoretical orthodoxy. This is called the class struggle. And you said that our call for hot cargoing was wrong. Yes, you did. Look it up, and we've documented it. That was the line. You want to talk about the bureaucracy? That was the line of Jim Spinoza, the head of the ILWU. Don't stop the war material. It might cause problems for the Union. And we called for the workers' strikes against the war, and you and the rest of the opportunists left said that would never happen, but guess what? It did. On May Day 2008, all 29 ports were shut down on the West Coast. And you sneered at it, and you deformed it. Talk about deformed. You deformed and you fabricated. Same damn thing that you did about the Mumia shutdown in 1999. Then you had to apologize and retract it, kind of, sort of. But what about the one in Brazil that started it? The first workers' action for Mumia's freedom, the first labor shutdown for Mumia's freedom. It's not a page of paper. It's a real action in the class struggle, and it's part of the program of revolutionary Marxism. That happened in Brazil. You have not written a single word about it since that time, not one time. Why do you think that is? Oh, because the sectarians carried it out. And the anti-sectarians, anti-sectarianly, don't mention it, because those are unmentionable, disposable people on the receiving end. Not of your mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Trivial Boy Scout talking. I don't mean the person, I mean the phrase. It was not a mistake, it was a betrayal. And yes, when we called to defeat U.S. imperialism and we criticized you for dropping it, what did you say? A comrade referred to this. No, we're not going to let you forget it. You want to talk about now? Now is a product of history. You are a product of that history. You called us, you said that we were playing the counterfeit card of anti-Americanism. You said this in the weeks after 9/11, when anti-Americanism could land you in prison. And there was roundups of immigrants all over the place. And we went to the demonstrations to free them, which you did not, of course. Well, you did go there to denounce us one time, but you said something else. You said the IG's purpose is otherwise. It is playing to a different audience, one of third world nationalists for whom the only good American is a dead American. That's what you wrote about us. So you can say, well, we all make mistakes. This was not a mistake. And you're doing the same kind of obeisance and genuflection to your own ruling class today, including over your leaflet on Palestine. Now, turn that off, please. So why did this powerful memo make the two sides do the opposite things? Because you ceased to be revolutionaries through a process of degeneration, which has now culminated in you openly saying that the founding program of the tendency you still pretend to have some continuity with, somehow, was what? The old-timers are supposed to chew this up and swallow it. The historic position of Spartacism turned the world upside down. Interesting. Look at your Spartacus 68. Look
1 minute, please.
The hammer's upside down and backwards. They get a lot of things upside down and backwards. And their new logo. Shaped by the delusion that the historic leader of our tendency, Jim Robertson, had a correct approach, blah, blah. Therefore, it upheld many positions, counterposed to permanent revolution. It's a perversion of permanent revolution, they say. The old-timer's supposed to eat it, swallow it, and regurgitate it. Okay? You have sold your birthright for a mess of pottage. The revisions are far from finished. The reason for this stuff about the anti-imperialist United Front and supporting the language laws in Quebec and Catalonia and embracing the Freedom Charter and the rest of it is to take what remains of this organization very, very far, qualitatively far. Who knows how far, but it will be enormously far from what it set out to do. And I'm very glad, let me just say, that the grotesque Neely leaflet was attacked and quite horrified by the response. Forward to a real Fourth International, not a collection of rotten opportunist gimmicks.
Time. Okay. Okay, the ICL summary has 15 minutes.
Okay. So I think I don't need to explain once more that I actually provided a perspective for the fight for the Fourth International today, and there was absolutely nothing from the speakers of the LFI. So I won't insist too much on this point. I will actually respond to as many of the questions I can. By the way, about the old-timers, you should talk to them, see what they think. I'll tell you, they're not under hostage. Let's start with the beginning, the crisis in the left. Like, you cannot ignore this question. The entire left has been a crisis for the last, well, more than 30 years, but it's been particularly acute in the last 30 years. You have to, if you want to be serious to reforge the Fourth International, you have to try to provide an answer to explain what is the reason for this crisis. You have no answer. Liberalism, we are asked to define it. I'm not going to do a whole history of liberalism, which you can read somewhere else, but I'm going to try to pose it concretely, because liberalism changes in different times and space. So we did not invent the task to fight liberalism. Actually, most of Lenin's career was fighting bourgeois liberalism in Russia, fighting the influence of the Cadet and against the Cadet opposition to Tsarism. So we're not inventing the fight against liberalism. What we're doing is we're putting it in the concretes of the epoch in the 1990s and today. In the 1990s, as our comrade explained, liberalism was the ideology of US imperialism. Its strength was a reflection of the strength of US imperialism. It was pushed everywhere, and that's why you see the shift towards liberalism in the workers' movement all around the world. Today, the character of liberalism is changing because US imperialism is in decline. It's no longer a confident liberalism asserting and pushing. It's a reactive, hysterical liberalism that cannot deal with any challenge, any criticism, and that reacts frantically. Liberalism is the cover against under which the US imperialism and its allies have made all their crimes around the world. It has fueled massive discontent against it. Yet the left, the problem with the left is they're still trying to fight reaction today, holding on to the coattails of this liberalism. It's not just some academic abstract question, it's rooted in the task. What is the task today? The task is to break the left from liberalism. That's the task. Now let's get to some of the concrete questions. Palestine, what to do now? What is the obstacle to actually defending Palestine in the workers' movement? It's the Democratic Party in the United States. We need to fight to break the influence of the Democratic Party on the movement. That means the DSAers who are now leading this movement. There's a gigantic popular front that goes from Joe Biden to the left-wing DSAers in Congress to the other DSAers who claim to be communists. You need to break this chain. If you cannot break this chain, you cannot defend Palestine, because that's how the whole movement is being organized on. We want to talk about the legacy. Answer this question about the legacy of the Spartacist League on the question of the Nakba. Our initial position, read it, it's a defense of the Nakba. That's a criminal position. And then we covered it up by saying that it was a factual mistake. Answer this question. Now, the black question, BLM, what were the tasks? Why did the left betray? What was the task? The task was to break the black movement from liberalism, to bring it on a communist path. How to do that? Not just by saying, break with the Democrats, and not by just saying, we need socialist revolution. You need to exploit the contradictions of the movement. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with our Open the Archives campaign. And you know what? Again, it's not intervention. What about it? We are inspired by the call of the Bolsheviks to open the archives of the Tsarist diplomacy, secret diplomacy. You know how they achieved that? They did it. It was possible. You know how they did it? They made a revolution. That's how you do it. And you know what? You're disparaging about our demand. Oh, will that bring justice? Actually, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of people whose families have been murdered by the cops who do want to know what happened and what's in these archives. It's not just some puff. My turn. Mexico. Okay, you guys got organized workers' defense guards. All to your honor. But you know what? UNAM, it was a gigantic movement. Okay? How did this advance? How did this movement, how did the revolutionaries intervene in this movement to break from populism, to break populism? Why wasn't there no revolutionary pole built out of this movement? Why? It's because all the so-called communists think that fighting against imperialism is a capitulation to the bourgeoisie. But the only way to defeat populism is to push forward the struggle against imperialism. Portland, this is exactly what we show. Your speaker said that the shutdown in the West Coast, that's what we mean by class struggle. The ILWU supports Joe Biden. So they can do one day of action. That's to get the steam out. Communist workers need to go to that. They need to support this. But they need to do this at the same time denouncing the ILW bureaucracy. And that's the element that's missing. And that's the centrism. You will never stop, the ILW bureaucracy will never stop arms shipments to Ukraine or to Palestine. There needs to be a fight against them. And that's exactly what you're not doing. DSA, okay, how are you going to build a revolutionary party in the United States? It's by splitting social democracy. It's by splitting DSA. You can go to them and be like, oh yes, you supported Vietnam, you supported all the crimes of US imperialism, which is true, by the way, which is true. And you know what? The SPD, they supported all the crimes of German imperialism and so on. But if you want a revolutionary party in Germany, you need to split the SPD. If you want a revolutionary party in the United States, you need to split social democracy. And you don't do that just by throwing rocks at people. Actions. You want to talk about some of the actions we did. Our picket line, look at our intervention in the strike in Britain. Every step of the way, we told workers what needed to be done. We put forward a campaign for picket lines and it became a polarizing question in the left because the whole left refused to say, never cross a picket line. UAW strike, same thing. We showed step by step. How dare you say it's economist? Our main slogan was to tie this strike to black liberation. And if you think that a devastating blow to GM and Ford would not have helped the Palestinians, you are so wrong. That would have totally undermined the position of the US right now and made it much more difficult to do their crimes in Palestine. Brazil, you know what? What we did was despicable. I'm ashamed of it. But you know what? How are we going to advance the revolution in Brazil? We're going to advance it by combining the struggle against imperialism, the fight against black liberation, and showing how the Popular Front betrays this. And that's what you guys have not done. And that's what none of our discussions with Luta Meteorologica ever touched on. It's my turn. Robertson. Lots was said about Robertson. I want to defend him a little bit here. We do not throw away our whole legacy. We actually, what do we stand on? We stand on the proudest moment of the ICL. We stand on the Russian question, on the defense of the Soviet Union, on the defense of the DDR. Nobody said anything about this, but that's what we defend of Spartacism. So no, we will not get rid of our paper. We will keep being proud to be Spartacists. So, I actually have reading these documents by the LFI, actually I got a fair amount of respect for the comrades who at the time refused to capitulate under this bureaucratic witch hunt. Honestly. But it's not because you were the victims of a bureaucratic purge that you had the answers for the historic tasks of the working class in that epoch. So you speak about the task and perspectives. But you know what? If you don't have the correct tasks and perspective, then you're not rooting your program in a Marxist materialist base. So you're left just going around, like floating around. And what happened, the truth is that the ICL and LFI were two poles circling around liberalism. Sometimes sectarian, sometimes opportunists. Both sides. And you know what? Oh yeah, you can say, oh yes, the SWP called us sectarian 30 years ago. But you know what? People are sectarian. Sectarianism is a problem in the left, just as opportunism is. And Trotsky and Lenin fought both tendencies. So I want to conclude by saying, to urge comrades, study these presentations, study the content of the documents, and ask yourself, who actually has a perspective to go forward? Who can actually say, what is the task of revolutionary leadership today? And I think the answer to this question is very obvious. Thanks.